Good evening, listeners. Welcome to Noir Intellect. I'm your host, Victor Blackwood. If you enjoy mysteries, hidden clues, and uncovering the truth, don't forget to like and subscribe. And tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Leave it in the comments below. Now, keep your eyes open and your mind sharp. The mystery begins now. Chapter 1. The photograph that arrived without a sender. At 10 minutes past 8 on a wet Thursday morning, a dead man arrived at Nero Wolfe's brownstone. I mean that figuratively. The man was not dead, and as far as I knew, he had never been alive. What arrived was a photograph of him, or what remained of him, and the photograph had been sent in such a fashion that it was impossible to say who had sent it, why it had been sent, or whether the sender expected Wolfe to solve a crime, identify a corpse, or merely appreciate an especially elaborate piece of nonsense. I was in the front hall when the delivery boy handed me the envelope. It was thick, cream-colored, and large enough to contain a respectable collection of photographs or a very thin legal brief. Rain had darkened one corner. There was no return address. The boy wore a cap pulled low over his forehead. "Sign here, Mr. Goodwin." I signed. "Who sent it?" He shrugged. "Blackwood Manor." "That isn't a person. That's what they told me." "Who told you?" "The man who gave it to the driver." "What man?" "The man." "Excellent description." He grinned. "I got the envelope. You got the mystery." Then he left. I shut the door and examined the envelope again. The name Blackwood Manor had been typed across the center in black capital letters. No street address, no town, no state, no postage stamp. The delivery had been made by hand to a city courier service. That alone interested me. Anything arriving at Nero Wolfe's house without a proper explanation usually had a proper explanation somewhere inside it. I carried the envelope into the office. Wolfe was in his chair behind his desk, reading a newspaper with the concentrated distaste of a man who had discovered that civilization had once again failed to meet reasonable standards. His breakfast tray stood beside him. Coffee steamed in a silver pot. A plate containing 2 slices of buttered toast and half a grapefruit occupied the center. The brownstone was quiet. Fritz was upstairs supervising the orchids. The rain tapped against the windows. I placed the envelope on Wolfe's desk. Blackwood Manor. He lowered the newspaper. "Where?" "Apparently somewhere. That is not a location. It is the only one supplied." He looked at the envelope. "No, then open it." "You aren't going to ask what it is?" "If I asked, you would tell me. I prefer evidence." I slit the envelope. Inside was a photograph wrapped in a sheet of heavy white paper. The photograph was approximately 8 by 10 inches, old, very old. Its edges had yellowed, and one corner had been bent and carefully flattened again. I removed it. 7 people stood on the stone steps of an imposing country house. Or, more accurately, 6 people stood there. The 7th had been deliberately erased. I held the photograph beneath the desk lamp. The house behind them was enormous. Stone facade, tall windows, a wide staircase descending from a central entrance. 2 stone lions flanking the lower steps. The architecture suggested money that had been old long enough to become confident. Across the bottom of the photograph, written in faded ink, were 3 words. Blackwood Manor, 1954. I looked at Wolfe. He had stopped reading the newspaper. 7 people, I said. "Yes." 6 faces. "Yes." 1 removed. "Yes." "You're very talkative this morning." He extended his hand. I gave him the photograph. Wolfe examined it without touching the surface. He studied the house first, then the people, then the erased face. His expression changed, only slightly. But I knew him well enough to notice. Not surprise, interest. He put the photograph flat on the desk. Magnifying glass. I handed it to him. He examined the erased section. Whoever had removed the face had not simply scratched out the image. The work had been careful. The head and upper portion of the body had been scraped away until the photographic emulsion was gone. The surrounding people remained untouched. The stonework behind the missing figure had been damaged only slightly. Someone had wanted that particular person erased. Not the entire figure, only the face. The body remained. The clothing remained. The position remained. Even the shadow cast by the figure remained. Wolfe touched the edge of the photograph with one fingertip. "Interesting that it remains true." "What interests you?" "That the person was not removed." I stared at him. The face was. Yes, the same thing practically. No, he lifted the magnifying glass again. If the purpose had been to eliminate this individual from the photograph, the simplest method would have been to remove the entire figure, unless the photograph had already been printed. Then the person could have been painted over, which is what happened. Only partly, he pointed. The body remains. Perhaps the person was too difficult to erase. No, why not? Because the person is not difficult to erase. He looked at me. Someone wanted us to know that a person stood here. That was the first moment I became genuinely interested. I leaned over the desk. You're saying the erasure itself is a message. I am saying it may be. Who are the other 6? That is what you will discover. Before breakfast? After. He pushed the photograph toward me. Do not damage it. I'll try. You will succeed. That was Wolfe's way of expressing confidence. I looked again at the 6 surviving faces. The photograph had the peculiar stiffness common to old family pictures. Nobody smiled naturally. Nobody seemed entirely comfortable. They stood according to rank rather than affection. The man at the center was perhaps 60, tall, thin, white-haired. His right hand rested on the head of one of the stone lions. To his right stood a woman in a dark dress. Beside her a younger man. On the opposite side stood another man and 2 women. The erased figure stood slightly behind the central group. Not at the edge, not in the background. Near the center, important enough to be included. Unimportant enough, apparently, to be erased. I studied the clothing. 50s, 1954. Yes, good. You know that because of the writing and the clothing and the automobile. I looked more closely. A dark sedan appeared behind the stone wall near the left side of the house. You can identify the year. Approximately. You frighten me sometimes. Good. I picked up my notebook. Where do we begin? Blackwood Manor, obviously. Find it. That's the problem. Then solve it. I reached for the telephone. How? Start with the photograph. That was Wolfe's first instruction. It would not be his last. Blackwood Manor proved easier to locate than expected. A newspaper archive contained a reference to the Blackwood family in connection with a county historical society. Another source mentioned a Blackwood estate sale in 1978. A third identified the property as lying outside the town of Ashbury, approximately 200 miles north of New York City. By 10:30 I had a name, Blackwood Manor, Ashbury County. Built in 1891, owned by the Blackwood family until 1978. Abandoned after the death of its last resident. The house had not been sold. That was unusual. It had simply remained under a trust established by the family. Why? I asked the historian on the telephone. Nobody knows. Nobody. The family records are private. Who controls the trust? Blackwood Historical Foundation. Do they have a telephone number? Yes. Give it to me. The number led to a disconnected line. I tried another. A law office. The receptionist listened carefully. Are you representing the Blackwood family? No. Then I can't discuss the trust. I'm not asking about the trust. What are you asking? Who sent a photograph from Blackwood Manor to Nero Wolfe? There was a pause. I'm sorry? Apparently someone did. I don't understand. Neither do I, she disconnected. I smiled. That was encouraging. I called Kramer. Inspector Kramer answered on the 4th ring. What? Good morning to you too. If you're calling before lunch, it isn't good. I have a country house. I don't want it. Blackwood Manor. There was a pause. Why? Photograph. What photograph? Old one. What's in it? 6 people and a hole where a face should be. Goodbye, Kramer. What? I think someone erased the face deliberately. I hope they did. Otherwise your photograph has developed a disease. I'm serious. So am I. Blackwood Manor was closed in 1978. Then whoever sent the photograph had to get into the house. Unless the photograph was already outside. Then why send it? That's what I'm trying to find out. Kramer sighed. Send me a copy. I haven't made one. Make one. You're interested? I'm interested because you are. That's flattering. No, it's caution. He hung up. I made 3 copies. One went to Kramer. One remained in my desk. The original stayed with Wolfe. By 11:15 I had discovered something else. The Blackwood family had been wealthy, very wealthy. The original owner of the manor, Jonathan Blackwood, had made his fortune in rail transport and timber. His son, Edward Blackwood, expanded the holdings. The family owned several mills, 3 farms, and a substantial tract of forest. The file's Blackwood to live at the manor had been Charles Blackwood. He died in 1978. No surviving children, no obvious heirs. The estate passed into a trust, but the photograph dated from 1954. Charles Blackwood would have been 38. I searched for photographs of him. There he was. The man at the center of the photograph. White-haired? No, dark-haired. The photograph had been taken more than 20 years before his death. He stood at the center of the group with one hand resting on the stone lion. That gave us our first name, Charles Blackwood. The woman beside him was his wife, Eleanor. The younger man was his brother, Richard. The older woman was his aunt, Margaret Blackwood. The younger woman was his cousin, Helen. The final visible person was Thomas Avery, a family attorney. 6 names, 6 faces, 1 absence. I took the information upstairs to Wolfe. He was among the orchids. The plant rooms were warm and humid, filled with green leaves and delicate blossoms. Wolfe stood before a flowering orchid, his face expressionless. You've identified 6, yes. He did not turn. Names? I gave them. He nodded. Occupation? Charles Blackwood owned the estate. Eleanor? His wife Richard? Brother Margaret? Aunt Helen? Thomas Avery? Attorney. Good. He finally turned. The erased figure? Still unknown. Excellent. How can that be excellent? Because if the other 6 are identifiable, the unknown person is almost certainly the point. I thought you wanted to know why the face was erased. I do. So, first, why? Because names create relationships. And relationships create motives. Exactly. I gave him the notes. He read them. Where was the photograph found? Unknown. Who sent it? Unknown. Why? Unknown. Then we have 3 unknowns. 4. He looked up. 4? Who is the 7th person? A faint smile touched his face. Yes. That afternoon I drove to the office of the Blackwood Historical Foundation. It occupied 2 rooms above a law firm in Midtown. A woman named Susan Blake received me. She was in her 50s, wore plain glasses, and had the expression of someone accustomed to keeping secrets without enjoying them. I understand you have questions about Blackwood Manor. Several. Are you representing Mr. Wolfe? Yes. Is he interested? Someone sent him a photograph. Her face changed. Not much, but enough. From the manor. The envelope said so. Who sent it? We don't know. She looked at the photograph I placed on the table. Her eyes went immediately to the erased face. She did not ask who the people were. She recognized them. Where did you get this? Do you know the photograph? I've seen it. When? She hesitated. Years ago. Where? In the family archive. Who is missing? She looked at the blank face. Then at me. I can't tell you. Why not? Because I don't know. You just said you've seen it. I have. Then you know who was standing there. I know who the family said was standing there. That was a different answer. I leaned forward. Who? She looked toward the door. Please leave, Mrs. Blake. Mr. Goodwin. You recognized the photograph immediately. Yes. You recognized the erased figure too. I recognized the place. That's not what I asked. She stood. The Blackwood family had reasons for keeping certain things private. 30 years after Charles Blackwood died. Some things remain private after death. Was the erased person a Blackwood? No. An employee. She said nothing. An attorney? Nothing. An enemy? Her expression tightened. Please leave. I stood. At the door I turned. Did Charles Blackwood know the person was being photographed? She stared at me. I don't know. Did he know the photograph existed? Another pause. I don't know who removed the face. She closed her eyes briefly. I don't know. I believed her. That was the problem. She knew something, but not enough. As I reached the elevator, she called after me. Mr. Goodwin. I turned. Yes? Wolfe has the photograph. He does. Tell him not to assume the missing person was the one the family wanted forgotten. I waited. Then who? She looked frightened. The person who remained visible. The elevator doors closed. I stood alone in the metal box, thinking about that sentence. The person who remained visible, not the erased face. The survivors. That was exactly the sort of distinction Wolfe liked. When I returned, Wolfe was in the dining room. Fritz had prepared dinner: roast chicken, green beans, potatoes, a salad with walnuts and apples. Wolfe was already seated. I took my place. You found something? Yes. Not. No. The purpose. Maybe. Tell me. I described the meeting with Susan Blake. Wolfe listened while eating. When I finished, he put down his fork. She told you the important thing, which was that we have been asking the wrong question. I knew you'd say that. The erased person may not be the mystery. Then what is? The 6 survivors. I leaned back. 6 people standing on the steps. Yes, all identifiable. Yes, all apparently innocent. Apparently, why would someone leave them visible? Because their visibility is useful. Useful for what? Wolfe looked toward the photograph. Recognition. By whom? Someone who knew all 7. I frowned. That's not enough. No. He picked up the photograph again. I'll look at the arrangement. I did. Charles Blackwood is in the center. Yes. Eleanor beside him. Yes. Richard on the other side. Yes. Margaret and Helen behind. Yes. Thomas Avery at the edge. Yes. And the erased figure. Between Thomas and Helen. Correct. Wolfe tapped the photograph. The person was not placed at the edge. So? The photographer wanted all 7 visible until someone altered it. Exactly. Why leave the body? Because the body tells us where the person stood. I stared at him. You keep returning to that. Because it matters. The erased person was standing in a specific place. Yes. Which tells us, possibly, what role the person had. How? Look at the feet. Bent. Closer. The erased figure stood slightly apart from the others. Not with the family, not with the attorney, not with the servants. The shoes were visible, dark, polished. The body leaned slightly forward. The hands were clasped behind the back. Professional, I said. Perhaps. Security, possibly. Gardener, unlikely. Servant, look at the coat. The coat was visible from the shoulders downward. Dark wool, long, well-tailored. Not a servant's uniform. Businessman, more likely. Then why erase his face? Wolfe's expression became thoughtful. Because someone wanted to destroy identity without destroying testimony. I sat back. Testimony? The photograph itself is testimony. To what? That this person was there. When? 1954. At Blackwood Manor. Yes, with the family. Yes, I looked again at the 6 visible faces. Suddenly the photograph seemed less like a family portrait. It looked like evidence. A witness list. 6 people preserved. 1 person erased. And the more I looked at it, the more I became convinced that whoever had altered it had not been trying to hide the existence of the 7th person. They had been trying to hide the identity. That meant the body mattered, the position mattered, the 6 surviving faces mattered, and perhaps most important of all, the photograph had survived. Someone had kept it for 72 years. Someone had decided that now was the time to send it to Nero Wolfe. I looked at Wolfe. Do you think the sender knows who the erased person was? Yes. Do you think the sender knows why the face was removed? Do you think the sender is one of the 6? Wolfe considered that. No. Why? Because the photograph would have been sent much earlier, unless the sender was waiting. Exactly. For what? Wolfe returned his attention to the photograph. For the 6 people in it to become dangerous again. That sentence stayed with me. Outside, rain began again. The brownstone windows reflected the warm lights of the office. Above us, Wolfe's orchids flourished in their controlled world of heat, water, and patience. On his desk lay an old photograph of a country as a state, recognizable faces, 1 erased face, and a question that had finally acquired the shape of a crime. Not who had been removed, but why someone had gone to such care to make certain that the world could still see the person standing there. I picked up my cigarette. Tomorrow? Wolfe closed his eyes. Tomorrow we find out what happened at Blackwood Manor in 1954. And the 7th person. His eyes opened. Mr. Goodwin. Yes, we already know the most important fact about him. What? He was there. Chapter 2. The 7 people on the steps. The trouble with country houses is that they encourage people to remember things that never happened. A city apartment has little patience for memory. Somebody moves out, somebody moves in, and the wall between them acquires another coat of paint. But a country house keeps everything. A stain on a staircase, a name scratched into a door, a chair nobody sits in because somebody's grandfather once died in it. A locked room becomes important merely because it has remained locked. Blackwood Manor had been keeping its secrets for 72 years. I arrived there on a Monday afternoon under a sky the color of old pewter, carrying Wolfe's instructions in my pocket and a photograph in a leather folder. The house stood at the end of a long gravel drive bordered by bare trees. It was larger than the photograph had suggested. The central section rose 3 stories, with 2 wings extending toward the woods. Stone lions guarded the front steps. Their faces had been worn smooth by weather, but their expressions remained stern enough to discourage trespassers. The windows were tall and narrow, most were dark. One showed a faint yellow light. I stopped the car and looked at the house. It had the unpleasant dignity of a man who knows something about you and intends to wait until you discover what it is. A man opened the front door before I reached it. He was in his 60s, broad across the shoulders, with grey hair and a face that looked as though it had spent a lifetime outdoors. "Mr. Goodwin?" "That's right. I'm Walter Crane. Caregiver?" "Estate manager." "Of course." He looked at the leather folder beneath my arm. "You brought the photograph." "I did." His eyes moved away. "That was my first useful observation. Mr. Wolfe sent me." "I know. You've heard of him." "Everyone has." "That saves time." He did not smile. "Come inside." The entrance hall was enormous. A staircase curved upward on both sides of the room. Portraits covered the walls. Blackwood faces. Men in formal coats. Women in elaborate dresses. Children who looked annoyed at being photographed. At the far end stood a grandfather clock. It had stopped at 11:17. I glanced at it. "Broken?" "Stopped." "Why?" "Nobody knows." "How long?" 72 years. He looked back. Neither of us mentioned the photograph. That was also useful. Walter Crane led me into a library, with tall shelves and a fireplace large enough to roast a respectable cow. A fire burned low in the grate. 3 people were waiting. Margaret Blackwood was first. She was an elderly woman with white hair arranged severely, and hands folded over the head of a silver-topped cane. Eleanor Blackwood sat beside the window. She was thinner than the photograph suggested, and considerably older, naturally, but the eyes were unmistakable. The third was Thomas Avery. He had aged better than the others. Perhaps lawyers preserve themselves through practice. He stood when I entered. "Mr. Goodwin." "Mr. Avery, you've come about the photograph." "I have." Margaret looked toward the window. Eleanor said nothing. Thomas gestured toward a chair. "Sit." I sat. I removed the photograph from its folder. The effect was immediate. Margaret's fingers tightened around her cane. Eleanor turned away. Thomas stared directly at the erased face. No surprise, no confusion, recognition. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Then it vanished. I put the photograph on the table. "I understand this was taken here." "Yes," Thomas said. "When?" 72 years ago. "Why?" "A family celebration." "What were you celebrating?" "The signing of an agreement." "What agreement?" Thomas hesitated. "Property. Property. An important transfer." "What property?" "The estate, Blackwood Manor, among other holdings." "Who signed it?" "Charles. Charles Blackwood." "Yes. Anyone else?" "Several parties' names." Thomas looked at Margaret. Margaret said quietly, "That was a long time ago, I've noticed. You cannot expect us to remember everything." "I don't." I tapped the photograph. "Only the important things." Thomas smiled without amusement. "That is precisely the difficulty," I began with Margaret. She remembered the photograph. She remembered the steps. She remembered the weather. She remembered Charles wearing a dark suit. She remembered Eleanor carrying a small bouquet. She remembered Thomas standing near the edge. She remembered Helen laughing. She remembered Richard drinking whiskey from a glass he had hidden behind his back, because Charles disliked drinking before dinner. She remembered 7 people. Then I asked about the 7th. She looked at me steadily. "There were 6, I pointed to the erased figure. "That body?" She glanced down. "I don't know who that was. You remember 6 people?" "Yes." "And you don't remember the 7th? "There was no 7th. "Then who is standing there?" Her mouth tightened. "I cannot say." "Because you don't know?" "Those are different answers." She looked toward Thomas. He remained silent. I leaned back. "Was the photograph taken after the property agreement was signed?" "Yes." "Was everyone present at the signing?" "Yes." "Everyone in the photograph?" "Yes." "6?" "Yes." I pointed to the erased body. "And him?" Margaret's expression hardened. "I told you there was no him." I smiled. "That's going to make things difficult." "Why?" "Because somebody seems to have forgotten to erase his shoes." She looked at me. For the first time, genuine irritation crossed her face. That was useful too. Eleanor was more cooperative. She remembered the celebration. She remembered the agreement. She remembered the photographer. She even remembered the cake. Chocolate, she said. Homemade? Mrs. Finch made it. Who was Mrs. Finch? The cook. She is to attend the celebration? Of course not. Was there anyone outside the family? The attorney. Thomas Avery. Yes. Anyone else? No. I showed her the photograph. She stared. Who is missing? Nobody's. Blackwood. Please. There a seventh person? No. Then why was part of the photograph removed? I don't know. Who removed it? I don't know. Why? I don't know. Do you remember anyone standing between you and Thomas Avery? Her face changed. Barely. But enough. No. Do you remember a man wearing a dark coat? No. A visitor? No. A business associate? No. A witness? No. A clerk? No. She looked directly at me. There was nobody. I made a note. Nobody. That's your final answer? Yes. I closed the notebook. Thank you. As I stood, she said something so quietly that I almost missed it. Mr. Goodwin. Yes, some memories are better left alone. I turned. Then why keep the photograph? She did not answer. Thomas Avery's version was different. According to him, the photograph had been taken after a private dinner. There had been 6 people on the steps. Charles, Eleanor, Richard, Margaret, Helen, Thomas. No one else. The property agreement had been signed earlier that afternoon. The celebration had lasted until midnight. No outsider had been invited. What kind of agreement? I asked. A transfer of the estate, part of it. To whom? A corporation, which Blackwood Timber Holdings, owned by Charles, partly. Who owned the rest? Thomas looked at me. That is irrelevant. No. It is 72 years old. That doesn't make it irrelevant. He sighed. Several investors. Names? I don't recall. Do you remember the erased person? There was no erased person. Do you remember anyone standing behind the group? No. Anyone photographing you? Yes. Who? A local photographer. Name? Leonard Price. Still alive? I don't know. Do you remember what camera he used? Thomas stared at me. Mr. Goodwin, yes? Are these questions necessary? To me, yes. Why? Because Mr. Wolfe is interested. That silenced him. Thomas looked again at the photograph. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he murmured, "The photograph should have been destroyed." That was not the answer I expected. Why? He looked at me. I didn't say that. You did. No. I heard you. You misunderstood. Perhaps. I put the photograph back into its folder. Thank you. As I reached the door, Thomas spoke again. "There are things about Blackwood Manor that Mr. Wolfe would do well to leave alone." That's what everyone keeps saying. Because it's true. Then I suppose he'll be disappointed. Helen Blackwood was living in a cottage on the eastern edge of the property. She was 63, unmarried, and possessed the sharpest eyes I had encountered since arriving. She served me tea. I did not drink it, she noticed. Afraid of poison? No. Then why not drink? I'm working. So, am I at what? Remembering, she smiled. I've had 72 years to practice. I put the photograph on her table. She did not touch it. Beautiful, I said. Ugly family. That's a strong opinion. Families usually are. Who was the 7th person? There wasn't one. 3 people have said that. Then you have your answer. All 3 used almost the same words. She frowned. Did they? Nearly. What words? I quoted them. There was nobody. No one was there. There was no 7th person. Helen's expression became still. People often speak alike when they remember the same thing, or when they've agreed what to say. Her eyes sharpened. You are accusing us of lying. I'm considering it. About what? The photograph. She stood. You should leave. Why? Because you have no right to drag old matters into the light. Someone sent the photograph to Wolfe. I know. Who? I don't. Why? I don't know. Do you know who the 7th person was? She looked at the photograph again. Her eyes rested on the erased face. No. I waited, she whispered. But I remember his voice. That was the first genuine crack in the wall. I said nothing. She sat down again. You remember him? Not his face, his voice. Yes. What did he say? I don't know. Anything. She closed her eyes. Something about the agreement. What? I can't remember. Try. She shook her head. The music. What music? There was a violin. I felt my attention sharpen. At the celebration. She looked surprised. Yes. Who played? I don't know. Was there a violinist at the house? Not that I remember. Then why mention music? She looked at me with sudden fear. I shouldn't have. Why? Because it means you are getting close. To what? She stood. To something nobody here once remembered. I returned to the Manor just before sunset. Richard Blackwood had agreed to speak with me. He was Charles's younger brother. In the photograph, he had been a handsome man of 36. Now he was 61 and looked as though he had spent 72 years arguing with himself. We sat in a study overlooking the western lawn. He poured himself whiskey. Want one? No, your loss. He drank. You have the photograph. Yes. I thought it was gone. Where did you think it went? Destroyed. Who destroyed it? I don't know. You know who was in it? No. You're the fourth person to say that. Then perhaps it's true. I opened my notebook. The photograph was taken after the property agreement. Yes. What was transferred? Land. How much? Several thousand acres. To whom? A corporation. Blackwood Timber Holdings. Yes. Who controlled it? Charles. Who else? Investors. Names. He drank again. I don't remember. Do you remember the seventh person? He looked at me. No. Was it a man? No. Was it a woman? No. I waited. He frowned. I don't understand. You answered 2 questions I didn't ask. He stared at me, then he looked away. That was useful. I closed the notebook. Did he have a beard? Richard's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. No. I didn't ask you who he was. He lowered the glass. Mr. Goodwin. Yes, leave it alone. Why? Because the people involved are gone. Not all of them. Enough. What happened after the agreement? Nothing. Then why destroy the photograph? I don't know. Why deny the 7th person? There was no 7th person. Again, the same words. I stood. Thank you. As I reached the door, Richard said, if you speak to Wolfe, tell him this. What? The photograph is dangerous. How? It proves something. What? He looked at me. That someone was there who should not have been there. I returned to New York that night. Wolfe was in the office, seated beneath the yellow reading lamp. His dinner had been cleared. A bowl of orchids stood near the window. I put my notebook on his desk. 6 interviews. Results? 6 different memories. Good. Celebration. Her property agreement. Yes. 72 years ago. Yes. Who attended? 6 people. I looked at him. That's the problem. He waited. Every one of them says there were only 6. Interesting. Not one will admit knowing the 7th. Names? I gave him the 6 names. Then I added, there's also a name in the household records. He looked up. Who's? Leonard Price. He waited. Who was he? I don't know. Occupation? Household records list him as a temporary employee. When? 1954. How temporary? 3 days. Doing what? Records don't say. Does the name appear elsewhere repeatedly? How often? 7 times. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. 7. Yes. 7 references to Leonard Price. Exactly. Yet none of the 6 remembers him. That's what they say. What else? Helen remembers a voice. Whose? She doesn't know. What did the voice say? Something about the agreement. Wolfe leaned back. Anything else? There was a violin. His eyebrows rose. A violin. Apparently. He was silent. I handed him the notebook. There's more. He read the notes from the interviews. Then he looked at me. What phrase did they use? I quoted the statements. There was nobody. No one was there. There was no 7th person. Wolfe's expression became very still. They were rehearsed. That's what I thought. Not necessarily what? Memory. Memory. People who independently remember an event rarely use identical negative constructions. So, they were not merely remembering, they were denying. Precisely. He reached for the photograph. The 6 are not protecting the 7th person. Then what are they protecting? Their own version of the past. I leaned forward. Why? Wolfe studied the erased face. Because the 7th person was connected to the agreement, the property transfer. Yes. And Leonard Price? Find out who he was. Try harder. I knew you'd say that. He ignored me. The important question is not why 6 people deny knowing Leonard Price. Then what is? Why would 6 unrelated people remember the same absence? I stared at the photograph. The erased face looked more mysterious than ever. Wolfe tapped the image. Someone wanted this person removed. Yes, but whoever did it made a mistake. What mistake? They left the 6 witnesses. Why is that a mistake? Because 6 people can forget a face. He turned the photograph slightly toward the lamp. But they cannot all forget the same event. I looked again. The 6 people on the steps seemed suddenly less like a family and more like 6 witnesses standing together before a crime they had collectively agreed not to describe. And somewhere in the household records, repeated 7 times, was the name Leonard Price. A temporary employee. 3 days. No occupation, no photograph, no surviving record of his departure. Just a name. And the uneasy certainty that the erased man on the steps and Leonard Price were not two mysteries. They were one. Wolfe closed his eyes. Tomorrow, Mr. Goodwin, we examine the agreement. Where? Everywhere. That's encouraging. It should be. Why? Because if 6 people have spent 72 years denying that a 7th person existed, they have almost certainly forgotten one thing. What? The truth is rarely erased everywhere. He opened his eyes. It is usually erased only where someone expects us to look. Chapter 3. The name beneath the frame. There are 2 kinds of photographs that interest a detective. The first kind shows what happened. The second kind shows what somebody wanted you to believe happened. The photograph from Blackwood Manor had begun to look very much like the second kind. At 9 the next morning, I put it beneath the desk lamp in Wolfe's office and studied it again. Nothing had changed. Charles Blackwood still stood in the center. Eleanor still stood beside him. Richard still looked as though he had been caught doing something he intended to deny. Margaret and Helen remained composed. Thomas Avery remained at the edge, and between Helen and Thomas stood the body without a face. I had spent enough time looking at that missing face to become acquainted with its absence. The person had not been painted over. The emulsion had been scraped away. The body remained, the shoes remained, the coat remained. Even a portion of one hand remained near the edge of Helen's dress. Whoever had removed the face had wanted the body to stay. That was Wolfe's point. And Wolfe's points were generally expensive. I was still examining the photograph when he entered from the dining room. He had finished breakfast. He looked satisfied. That was dangerous. You have been staring at it for 20 minutes, he said. I've been waiting for it to confess. It has nothing audible. You are listening incorrectly, he sat. I placed the photograph before him, the frame. He looked at me. What about it? Something bothers me. Good. The photograph was sent in a heavy envelope. Yes, it was protected. Yes, but the frame is original, apparently. Nobody sent us the frame. No. So whoever mailed the photograph removed it from something, or something was removed from it. I smiled. You see? That's why I stay. Wolfe reached for the photograph. You may examine the frame. I turned it over. The back consisted of dark wooden boards held together with 4 small metal fasteners. Nothing remarkable, except that one fastener had been disturbed recently. I pointed. This. Wolfe leaned forward. Remove it. I fetched a screwdriver. The screw came out easily, too easily. The backing lifted. Beneath it was a layer of old brown paper. I peeled it away. A narrow strip of writing appeared along the inner edge of the frame, not on the photograph, on the wood. I brought the lamp closer. There were 3 characters, a date and initials. E.H. beneath them. October 17, 1954. I looked at Wolfe. That's interesting. It is. Nobody in the family has those initials. Not officially. And date. The photograph was supposedly taken 72 years ago. October 17. Find out what happened that night. I picked up my notebook. Celebration, yes. Property agreement, yes. 7 people, supposedly 6. Leonard Price. 7 appearances in the household records, exactly. Wolfe touched the initials. E.H. Who is E.H.? That is what you will discover. I stood. And if I find nothing, then you will have discovered something. I sighed. You're becoming more economical with words. No. You are becoming less patient. Same result. He ignored that. The frame tells us one important thing. What? The photograph was not intended to be displayed. I looked at the wooden backing. Why? Because the inscription is concealed beneath it. Unless someone wrote it later. Possible. Then the photograph was reframed. No. How do you know? The where, he pointed. The original fasteners have been in place for decades, except one. Recently disturbed. So, somebody opened the frame. Yes. After the photograph had already been framed, yes. And before they sent it to us. Exactly. I looked at the inscription again. October 17, 1954. E.H. The photograph had not merely survived. Someone had recently opened it. Someone had discovered the inscription. Someone had returned the photograph to New York. And then someone had sent it to Nero Wolfe. The question was no longer who had sent it. It was why. By 10:30 I was at the New York Public Library. By 11 I had learned that October 17, 1954 had been a Sunday. The weather records described rain beginning shortly after sunset. The newspapers mentioned a storm moving through the northern counties. Nothing about Blackwood Manor. Nothing about a property dispute. Nothing about a celebration. I searched for Blackwood Timber Holdings. That produced more. The company had announced a major land acquisition that week. 3 days later, the transaction was amended. 2 months later, the company was reorganized. Then another corporation appeared. Blackwood Development. Then another. Blackwood Forest Products. Then the paper trail became increasingly complicated. Companies came and went. Land moved, names changed, shares were transferred. By 1956, the original Blackwood Timber Holdings no longer existed. The pattern was familiar, too familiar. Property was not always stolen by taking it. Sometimes it was stolen by making ownership impossible to follow. I copied the records. Then I searched for Leonard Price. The first reference was in a household payroll ledger. October 15, 1954. 3 days' employment. The second appeared in a delivery record. The third in a maintenance log. The fourth in a private dining receipt. The fifth in a security report. The sixth in an entry marked simply, Mr. Price attended meeting. The seventh, Mr. Price departed. No occupation, no address, no employer, no signature. I stared at the seventh entry. Departed. Not dismissed, not left employment, departed. That word suggested someone had expected him to leave. I searched further. Nothing. Then I found EH, not a person, a company, Eastern Holdings. Its initials were EH, but the company had not existed in 1954. It had been incorporated in 1958. Wrong. I searched names: Edward Harrow, Eleanor Hayes, Evan Holt, Esther Hall, Elias Hurst. Nothing connected to Blackwood. Then, near the end of a scanned newspaper from Ashbury County, I found a small announcement. EH. Blackwood returns to New York. I read it twice. The article was dated October 18, 1954. The initials were not a company. They were a person. Eleanor Harcourt Blackwood, Charles Blackwood's wife, Eleanor. Her maiden name had been Harcourt. EH. I sat back. The initials beneath the photograph belonged to Eleanor. But why hide her identity? She was already in the photograph, unless EH did not mean her, or unless the inscription had been made by her. The second possibility was more interesting. I searched the newspaper for the words Blackwood Manor and Eleanor Harcourt. Another article appeared, a society column. It mentioned a private gathering at Blackwood Manor on October 17, 1954. The article was only 4 sentences. The celebration followed the completion of a property agreement. Charles Blackwood and his wife hosted several guests. A violinist provided music. The final sentence caught my attention. Mrs. Blackwood returned to New York the following morning. I read it again. Why mention her departure? The gathering was private, yet someone had told a newspaper society writer enough details to print them. I copied the article. Then I found something else. The violinist had a name, Samuel Reed. The same name Thomas Avery had given me, the violinist. That was too neat. I returned to the brownstone. Wolfe was in the plant rooms. I found him examining a white orchid. Samuel Reed. He did not look up. The violinist. Also the violinist. Interesting, very. I handed him the newspaper clipping. He read it. October 17th. Yes. Eleanor returned to New York the 18th. Yes. Why? That's what I'm trying to find out. He looked at the clipping again. Samuel Reed. The same man Thomas Avery named. I've tried. Try again. He's dead. How long? 1968. Family? 1 daughter. Where? Albany. Telephone. I gave it to him. Call her. I reached for the telephone. Before I do, there's something else. He waited. The initials beneath the frame. Yes, Mrs. Blackwood's maiden initials. Exactly. Could she have written them? Possibly. Why? I don't know. Maybe she marked the photograph. Why? To identify it. Wolfe shook his head. Too simple. What initials are not you suggest? Then what? A signature. I stared at him. She signed the photograph. Perhaps. Why would Eleanor sign a family photograph? Oh, she wouldn't. Then what was she signing? Wolfe's eyes rested on me. Her statement. I felt a small chill. What statement? The photograph. I waited. He continued. Mr. Goodwin, suppose you are present when a legal agreement is signed, all right? Suppose the agreement is false, all right? Suppose you know it is false. Yes, suppose you cannot stop it. You'd want evidence. Exactly. He pointed toward the photograph. What better evidence than a picture showing who was present? The seventh person. Yes. Then why erase his face? Because the photograph had to survive, without identifying him. Precisely. I considered it. Eleanor knew. Perhaps, and she signed the frame. Perhaps. With her initials. Perhaps. You're using that word too much. I use it when evidence is incomplete. Then what do we know? Wolfe answered immediately. We know the photograph was framed. We know someone opened the frame recently. We know Eleanor's initials are beneath the backing. We know the date. We know the property agreement. We know Leonard Price was present. We know a violinist named Samuel Reed was there. And, he looked at me, we know the 6 survivors have agreed to forget one person, Leonard Price. Possibly. Then why not simply ask them? Because we already did. And they lied. No, I frowned. Then what? They told the truth they were instructed to tell. I called Samuel Reed's daughter. Her name was Martha Reed. She lived outside Albany. When I introduced myself, she was silent for several seconds. You have the photograph. It was not a question. How do you know? My father spoke about it. What did he say? That one day somebody would come asking when, after he died. Why? Because he believed the photograph would return from where? She hesitated. Blackwood Manor. I sat straighter. You knew it was there? Yes. Who sent it to Wolfe? I don't know. Did your father? He died 11 years before I was born. That stopped me. You never met him? No. Then how do you know about the photograph? Because my mother kept his notes. What did they say? That the photograph had to remain hidden. Why? Because it proved that 7 people attended the signing. Who was the 7th? Silence. Martha? I don't know. Did your father? Yes. Who was he? I don't know. Then what do you know? Her voice dropped. My father wrote one sentence. What sentence? He said. The man in the photograph was not. The danger the agreement was. I wrote it down. Anything else? Yes. What? Never trust the person who says there were only 6. I looked toward Wolfe. He was watching me. He had heard every word. I thanked her and hung up. That's useful, I said. Very. She knows more. Yes. Should I call back? No. Why? Because now we know what happened to the photograph. I frowned. What? It was hidden. By Samuel Reed? Likely. Then removed. Yes. By whom? Wolfe looked toward the photograph. Someone who wanted it to reach New York. Why? To force us to ask about the night. That evening I spread every piece of information across the desk. The photograph, the seating arrangement, the newspaper clipping, the household records, the property filings, Leonard Price, E.H., Samuel Reed, the agreement. Wolfe stood behind me. Read it aloud. I did. October 17, 1954. Private celebration at Blackwood Manor following signing of property agreement. Continue. 6 known people. 1 unidentified. Continue. Samuel Reed photographed the gathering. Yes. Samuel Reed also played violin. Yes. Leonard Price appears in household records. Yes. Eleanor Harcourt Blackwood appears as E.H. Yes. She returned to New York the following morning. Yes. That is the question. I looked at the photograph. What if she left because she knew something was going to happen? Possible. What if the agreement was not complete? More likely. What if the 7th person had something to do with the missing part? Very likely. I tapped Leonard Price's name. He attended the meeting, yes, then departed. Yes. Maybe he carried the missing document. Wolfe said nothing. I looked at him. That's possible. Yes. But you don't believe it? No. Why? Because the photograph was taken after the signing. So? If Price carried the document, why remain for the photograph? To celebrate, perhaps. Then, why erase him? Because someone later feared identification. Exactly. Wolfe shook his head. No. No. The person in the photograph was not erased because he carried the document. Then why? Because someone needed the photograph to prove that he had been there without allowing anyone to identify him. I stared. That sounds contradictory. It is not. Explain. Suppose the 7th man was a witness to the agreement. Yes. Then his identity mattered. Only if someone knew who he was. I slowly understood. Someone wanted us to know a witness existed. Yes. But not who he was. Correct. Why? Because his identity would reveal something about the agreement. I looked down at the documents. The property transfer. Precisely. The room became very quiet. I remembered Helen's words. I remember his voice, the violin, the agreement, the photograph, the erased face, the hidden inscription. All of them pointed toward the same night. Not toward a missing man. Toward something that had happened after the photograph was taken. I looked at Wolfe. Then the real crime happened after the picture. He nodded. Yes. After the celebration? Yes. On October 17th, most likely. Yes, and Eleanor was still at Blackwood mourning. Yes. Why? Wolfe's gaze settled on the photograph. That is what we must learn. Near midnight, Wolfe returned to his chair. I was still examining the photograph. You've been staring at that body for an hour, he said. I've been thinking. An admirable activity. I've noticed something. What? The erased figure is standing closer to Eleanor than anyone else. Yes, not Charles. Not Thomas. No, Eleanor's, and the initials EH, are beneath the frame, yes. Maybe she knew him. She did. I turned. Wolfe was looking at me. You know who he was? No, but Eleanor did, almost certainly. Then why deny him? Because knowing him was dangerous. For her, for everyone. I looked again at the photograph. 6 people stood in the rainless memory of a distant afternoon. The 7th had no face, but now I could almost imagine him, a dark coat, hands behind his back, standing close to Eleanor, watching the others. And somewhere beneath the photograph was her hidden signature, EH, a mark that had survived 72 years of dust, neglect, and silence. The question was no longer whether Eleanor had known the 7th man. She had. The question was what she had tried to preserve by marking the photograph, and what had happened that night after the camera was put away. Wolfe reached for the bell. Archie. Yes? Tomorrow we learn what the agreement actually transferred. Property. No. He looked at the photograph. That is what the agreement claimed to transfer. He rang for Fritz. What it actually transferred, he said. Maybe the reason one man's face had to disappear. Chapter 4. The room behind the library. There are houses in which a secret room is a room that was built for a secret. Blackwood Manor was not one of them. Its secret room had been built for convenience, concealed for safety, forgotten through negligence, and rediscovered because one shelf had the decency to be crooked. I discovered it on Tuesday afternoon. Wolfe had sent me back to Ashbury with 3 instructions. Find the agreement, find out what EH had handled, and do not trust anything that had been preserved too neatly. The 3rd instruction was typical of Wolfe. It was also the one that proved most useful. I arrived at Blackwood Manor shortly after 2. Walter Crane met me in the entrance hall. You again. That sounded almost welcoming. It wasn't intended to. Good. We're making progress. He looked at the folder under my arm. More questions? Always. You have already spoken to everyone, not the walls. They don't talk. That's what everyone says. He frowned. I smiled. The old grandfather clock still stood at the end of the hall. Still stopped at 11:17. I had noticed it before. This time I looked at it longer. Was that clock stopped on October 17th? Crane stared at me. No. How do you know? It stopped years later when? I don't remember. Interesting. Because several people in this house have told me they don't remember things. He did not answer. I walked toward the library. Crane followed. What exactly are you looking for? An agreement. You've seen the records. I've seen copies. The originals were destroyed. Who told you? Avery. Thomas Avery. Yes. Did he say how they were destroyed? No. Then perhaps he should have. Crane stopped outside the library. You have permission to search the room from whom? The Foundation. Good. I opened the door. The library smelled of dust, leather, and damp stone. It was a magnificent room. Books climbed the walls to the ceiling. The fireplace was black with age. A long table stood beneath the windows. Portraits occupied the spaces between shelves. Charles Blackwood appeared twice. Eleanor once. Richard once. There was no portrait of Helen, no portrait of Thomas Avery, and no portrait of Leonard Price. I walked slowly around the room. Crane remained near the door. Where are the property records? 3rd cabinet. I opened it. Ledgers, maps, tax records, correspondence, receipts. Nothing immediately useful. I pulled out a drawer. Empty. Another empty. A 3rd contained envelopes. Most were dated between 1952 and 1957. I looked at Crane. These were never catalogued. Some were. Some? The Foundation hasn't finished the archive. After 48 years, he shrugged. Funding. Naturally, I opened the first envelope. A letter from a timber company. The second concerned a boundary dispute. The third was a notice from the county. The fourth was handwritten. No signature. I read it, Mr. Blackwood. The southern tract must not be included in the transfer. The survey does not correspond with the map delivered last week. Someone has altered the boundary. There was no date. I looked at Crane. Who handled these, Mr. Blackwood? Only him, usually. Who else? He hesitated. Blackwood. Anyone outside the family? No. Price? I don't know that name. I smiled. That's interesting. Why? Because it appears 7 times in your household records. Crane's face remained blank. Too blank. Perhaps the records are wrong. Perhaps. I returned to the letters. The southern tract, the survey, the transfer, the altered boundary. That was enough to make Wolfe sit up in his chair from 200 miles away. I reached for the next envelope. Nothing. The next. Nothing. Then I noticed the shelf behind me. One section of books protruded slightly farther than the others. I pushed it. Nothing. I pushed harder. A soft click came from inside the wall. Crane said, "What did you do?" "I found a book." "What book?" "The one nobody wanted moved." I pressed the shelf again. It shifted inward by an inch. Behind it was darkness. Crane stepped forward. "That's impossible." "Excellent." I pulled. The entire section swung inward. A narrow opening appeared. Beyond it was a small room, dusty, unventilated, filled with boxes. Crane stared. "I've been in this library for 20 years. I congratulate you. I never knew. That's probably why they hid it." He did not move. I took out my flashlight. "Coming?" "No." "Good." I entered alone. The room was perhaps 12 feet square. No window, no electric light. A single wooden table stood in the center. Along the walls were shelves filled with cardboard boxes. Some had labels, most did not. The air smelled of paper, old paper, the kind that had been shut away from light for decades. I opened the first box. Maps, property maps, survey maps, timber maps, road maps. The second contained correspondence. The third contained photographs. I stopped. Photographs. That was exactly what I had been looking for. I removed the first. A group standing beside a barn. 6 people. No 7th. The second. Charles Blackwood beside a truck. No 7th. The third. Eleanor with 2 women. No 7th. The fourth. Richard and Thomas Avery. No 7th. I went through the entire box. 21 photographs. Everyone preserved. Everyone carefully arranged. Except those showing the mysterious 7th person. Those had been cut. Not erased. Cut. The photographic paper had been removed in rectangular sections. Someone had taken scissors to the images. I spread them across the table. There were 6 mutilated photographs. In each one, the damage was in approximately the same place. A person standing near Eleanor. Sometimes only a shoulder remained. Sometimes a hand. Once, the lower half of a face was visible. The body was always intact enough to establish that someone had been there. The face was gone. I took out my notebook. This was not random. Someone had systematically removed one person from the photographic record. Not from one photograph, from all of them. I heard movement outside. Crane? No answer. I went to the opening. He was standing in the library. "Did you know this room existed?" "No." "Come here." He did not. "Why?" "Because I don't like it." "That's a reasonable position." He approached slowly. I showed him the photographs. His face changed. "You knew?" "No." "You recognized them?" "I've seen some." "Where? In the archive?" "Not this room, no." I held up one of the damaged photographs. "Who is this?" "I don't know." "Look at the position." He did. "That is the same person." "Yes." How do you know?" "Because someone removed him from every photograph." Crane said nothing. I picked up another. "This one." "No, look, I don't know." "You're lying." He looked at me. "You have no right to accuse me. I have a photograph with a missing man, 6 people who deny he existed, 7 references to Leonard Price, and now a hidden room full of photographs from which the same person has been removed." Crane's face hardened. "I don't know who he was." "That's not the same as saying he wasn't here." He looked away. I returned to the boxes. "Who used this room?" "I don't know." "Charles?" "Probably." "Eleanor?" "I don't know." "Thomas Avery?" "I don't know." "Leonard Price?" He stared at me. "Stop saying that name." "Why?" "Because I don't know him." "That's the 4th time you've said that." He did not answer. I smiled. People who don't know someone rarely become irritated when his name is mentioned. He left the room. I let him go. There was no point chasing him. The boxes were more interesting. The next box contained maps. The first showed the Blackwood estate in 1951, the second in 1952, the third in 1953, the fourth in 1954, the fifth in 1955. I spread them across the table. The boundary had changed, not dramatically. That was what made it dangerous. A southern boundary line had shifted approximately 300 yards. A stream had been moved on paper. A wooded area had been divided into two parcels. A road had disappeared. Another had appeared. I compared the 1953 map with the 1954 map. The southern tract had changed ownership. The transfer agreement had not merely involved timber rights. It had altered the land itself. I reached for the next map. It had a handwritten notation, E.H. reviewed, the initials, E.H. I felt a small satisfaction. At last, something concrete. I photographed the notation. Then I found another, E.H. received copy. Another, E.H. to retain original survey. Another, do not send through office, give to E.H. directly. I read that one twice. E.H. had handled confidential documents, not merely seen them, handled them, received copies, retained originals, and one document had been delivered directly to E.H. No office, no mail, no public record. I began searching the boxes more quickly. The next contained correspondence between Charles Blackwood and an unnamed surveyor. One letter said, "The figures cannot be reconciled. The acreage in the proposed transfer is greater than the acreage owned by Blackwood Timber Holdings." Another, "Do not raise this matter until after the signing. Mrs. Blackwood has been given the papers. She understands their importance." Stop. Mrs. Blackwood, Eleanor E.H., the woman in the photograph, the woman who had denied the seventh person existed, the woman who had left for New York the next morning. I read the sentence again. She understands their importance. Importance to whom and why? I turned to the next box. Correspondence. I found a letter addressed to Eleanor. No envelope. No signature. Only this: "You were right to keep the original. Do not allow Avery to replace it." I felt the room become colder. Thomas Avery, the family attorney. The man who had told me the photograph should have been destroyed. The man who had insisted there were only 6. I searched for Avery's name. It appeared repeatedly. Some references were ordinary, others were not. Avery requests revised map. Avery disputes southern tract. Avery says original unnecessary. Avery to arrange destruction. Destruction of what? I searched further. Then I found it. A folder labeled Southern Tract. Private inside were maps, correspondence, and one typed memorandum. The date was October 17, 1954. The day of the celebration. I read it. "The transfer cannot be completed as presently drafted. The attached survey demonstrates that the southern tract contains land not owned by Blackwood Timber Holdings. Any signature made upon the present document would be invalid unless the discrepancy is corrected." There was a handwritten note beneath it. E.H. has the proof. No signature. I stared at those 4 words. E.H. has the proof. That changed everything. The photograph was not simply a record of a celebration. It was evidence that Eleanor had been present when the agreement was signed. The hidden initials beneath the frame might not have been a label. They might have been a warning. E.H., the person who had the proof. And the 7th man? Perhaps he had been there because he knew about the discrepancy. Perhaps he had brought the evidence. Perhaps he had been the one person capable of proving that the property transfer was fraudulent. I looked at the damaged photographs. The face was missing. The body remained. Someone wanted the witness erased. But why leave evidence of his presence? Because the photograph was meant to tell a future investigator that there had been a witness. Someone had been careful, very careful, too careful. That was when I noticed the violin. It was in a photograph near the bottom of the box. A small gathering in the library. Charles was at the piano. Eleanor standing beside him. Thomas Avery holding a glass. Richard near the fireplace. And in the corner, partially hidden behind a chair, a violin case. I turned the photograph over. A date, October 17, 1954. No names, except one handwritten notation. After the signing, I looked at the image again. There was no 7th person, but the violin case was open. Someone had been playing. I thought of Helen. I remember his voice. I thought of the music. I thought of the agreement. I thought of Eleanor leaving the next morning, and I thought of the erased man. Perhaps the violin had not been entertainment. Perhaps it had been a signal. I called Wolfe. He answered immediately. Yes, I found the room. There was silence. You found what? A concealed room behind the library shelves. Continue. Maps of the estate? Yes. Anything unusual? The southern boundary changed in 1954. How 300 yards? Places. Ownership? Apparently? Apparently? The transfer included land Blackwood Timber Holdings didn't own. Wolfe was silent again. Anything else? Documents marked E. Mrs. Blackwood. Yes, what did she handle? Original surveys. Good. There's a memorandum dated October 17. Read it. I did. When I finished, Wolfe said, that is important. There's more. I am listening. Someone wrote, E.H. has the proof. Proof of what? That the property transfer was invalid. Excellent. There's also a photograph from the same night. Of whom? Charles, Eleanor, Richard, Avery, and a violin case. Interesting. Exactly. Anything else? 6 photographs have been deliberately cut to remove the same person. Wolfe's voice became quieter. Does the body remain? Yes. Then we were correct. About what? The purpose. Which is? The person was meant to be remembered. I looked at the photograph in my hand. By whom? By someone who knew enough to recognize the position. I frowned. That doesn't make sense. It will. You're enjoying this? Yes, at my expense. Naturally. I leaned against the table. There's one thing I don't understand. What? If Eleanor had the proof, why didn't she expose the fraud? Perhaps she tried. Nobody says she did. People rarely record failed attempts. Then why leave for New York the next morning? Wolfe paused. That is the question. And the 7th man, another. Do you think he was Leonard Price? I don't know. That's unusual. Not at all. But you usually have a theory. I have several. Want to share one? No. Why? Because you would mistake it for a conclusion. I smiled. Fair enough, he continued. Bring me copies of everything. I will. Not the originals. I wasn't planning to steal them. I know. Anything else? Go back to the room. I'm still here. Look for something that was not meant to survive. I glanced around. Such as? Something someone forgot. What? That is what you are there to discover. The line went dead. I looked around the room. Maps, letters, photographs, boxes. Everything seemed deliberate. Everything had been stored. Everything had been preserved. Wolfe wanted the thing that had not been preserved. The mistake, the accident, the forgotten object. I began searching again. At the bottom of the last box was a bundle of household receipts. Most were ordinary. Coal, food, repairs, wages. Then I found a receipt dated October 17, 1954. One item. Room service? Library. 2 dinners. 1 bottle of whiskey. 1 pot of coffee. Signed, L. Price. I stared at it. Leonard Price had not merely visited the manor. He had eaten there, that same night, in the library. I turned the receipt over. There was writing on the back. 3 words. Paid by E.H. Eleanor. She had paid for Leonard Price. Why? I slipped the receipt into an evidence envelope. Then I found another. A train ticket. Ashbury to New York, October 18, 1954. 1 passenger. Eleanor H. Blackwood. Departure 7:10 a.m. That explained the newspaper, but not why she left. Then I found something beneath the ticket, a small card, blank except for handwriting. He knows, no name, no date. Just those words, he knows. I looked at the damaged photographs, the hidden room, the maps, the survey, the agreement, the 7th man. Everything was tightening around the same night, October 17, 1954. The celebration, the signing, the violin, the secret documents, Eleanor, Leonard Price, Thomas Avery, and a property transfer that could not legally have happened. I put the card beside the receipt. Then I heard the library door open. I turned. Thomas Avery stood there. He looked at the open hidden room, then at me. For the first time since I had met him, he looked frightened, not irritated, not guarded, frightened. What are you doing here? He asked. Working. You have no authority to search those papers. I have permission from the foundation. Those are private family documents. Then you should have kept them somewhere less interesting. His eyes moved to the table. He saw the maps, the memorandum, the photographs. Then he saw the receipt. His face changed. I picked it up. Leonard Price. He said nothing. You know him? No. You're sure? Yes, you just looked at his name as though it had bitten you. He stepped toward me. Give me that. No. It belongs to the family. It belongs to the investigation. There is no investigation. Then why are you frightened? He stopped. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "Mr. Goodwin, you have no idea what you're disturbing. Maybe not. You should leave. That's been said before. You don't understand. I understand that a man named Leonard Price was at Blackwood Manor on October 17, 1954. Thomas's jaw tightened. I understand that Mrs. Blackwood paid for his dinner." His face went pale. "And I understand that somebody removed his face from every photograph in this room." He said nothing. I held up the memorandum. "And this says EH had the proof that the property transfer was invalid." Thomas looked at the paper. Then he looked at me. "Where did you find that? In the room you didn't know existed." His expression became almost blank. That room should have been destroyed. There it was. The same thought. The same mistake. Not the photograph. Not the seventh man. "Who ordered the destruction?" I asked. He turned toward the door. "Mr. Avery." He stopped. "Yes? Who was Leonard Price?" He looked back. For several seconds he seemed unable to answer. Then he said, "He was a witness." "A witness to what?" Thomas closed his eyes. "The agreement." "Why erase him?" He opened his eyes. "Because he wasn't supposed to be there. Yet he was." "Yes." "Who invited him?" Thomas looked toward the photograph. "Eleanor." Then he left. I stood alone in the library. For once I did not immediately chase him, because the answer had changed the entire shape of the case. Leonard Price had not been a stranger. He had been invited by Eleanor. He had been present at the signing. He had eaten in the library. He had handled something important. He had been photographed, and afterward someone had spent decades removing him from the record. I looked at the inscription beneath the photograph's frame, EH. It was no longer mysterious. It was a signature, a mark left by Eleanor Blackwood, a woman who knew the truth, a woman who had the proof, a woman who had invited the witness, and a woman who had left Blackwood Manor at 7:10 the next morning. I gathered the papers. Then I noticed one final photograph lying beneath the box. I lifted it. It showed the front steps. The same 7 people, the same day, the same photograph, but this version had not been damaged. The 7th man's face was visible. I froze. For several seconds I simply stared. The man was perhaps 45, thin, dark-haired, plain-faced. He wore the same long coat. His eyes were turned toward Eleanor, not toward the camera, toward her. On the back of the photograph was a handwritten name, Leonard Price, and beneath it, he was not the man who signed. I read the sentence twice, then a third time. The property agreement had been signed. Leonard Price had witnessed it. Eleanor had the proof. But Leonard Price was not the man who signed, which meant the fraud was not merely in the land. It was in the identity of the person whose name appeared on the agreement. I put the photograph carefully into the folder. Now I understood why the face had been erased. The photograph did not merely show that Leonard Price had been present. It showed exactly what he looked like. And if somebody had forged a signature, changed a name, or substituted one man for another, then Leonard Price was not simply a witness. He was the man who could identify the fraud. I left the hidden room and closed the shelf behind me. As I crossed the library, I looked once more at the portrait of Charles Blackwood. He seemed to be watching me. I stopped. "Right," I said aloud. "You had your 72 years." Then I walked out. I reached the brownstone after midnight. Wolfe was in his office. The orchids were dark shapes beyond the glass. A small dinner waited on the side table. He looked up as I entered. "You found something." "Everything." "That is unlikely." "I found Leonard Price." His eyes sharpened. "Alive?" "No." "Good. I have a photograph." I placed it before him. He studied the face. "Leonard Price." "Yes." "Who identified him?" "Someone wrote his name on the back." "And?" I gave him the sentence. "He was not the man who signed." Wolfe leaned back. He closed his eyes. For several seconds he did not move. Then he said, "Now we know why the photograph had to survive." "Why?" "Because the face was evidence." "Of what?" "The identity of the witness. And the witness knew the signature was false." "Yes." I sat. "Thomas Avery admitted Leonard was a witness." "Good," he said. "Eleanor invited him." "Excellent. She paid for his dinner." "Expected." "She left the next morning." "Expected." "And the property transfer was invalid." "Yes." I leaned forward. "So who signed?" Wolfe opened his eyes. "That is the question we should have asked at the beginning." I looked at the photograph. 6 faces, one face restored. A man named Leonard Price. A hidden room. A fraudulent agreement. A woman who knew the proof. and a lawyer who had spent 72 years insisting that the seventh man had never existed. I said, "Do you think Charles Blackwood signed it?" Wolfe shook his head. "No. Thomas Avery, no. Richard, no." "Then who?" Wolfe looked at the photograph one last time. "Tomorrow, Archie, we find out whose name was forged." He reached for the bell. "And when we know that, we will know why someone erased Leonard Price from the history of Blackwood Manor." I stood. "One more thing." "What? The photograph was hidden here for 72 years. "Yes. It was recently removed." "Yes, and then sent to us." "Yes, someone wanted us to find it." Wolfe nodded. "Obviously. Why?" His face became thoughtful. "Because whoever sent it has decided that the truth is now more valuable than silence." He pressed the bell. "Let us hope," he said, "that the truth is still alive." Chapter 5. The Ledger with 7 Names. By 8:30. The next morning, Nero Wolfe had converted my discovery into a problem of accounting. This was not surprising. Wolfe believed that almost every mystery could be improved by putting numbers beside it. People lied, witnesses forgot, photographs were altered, and lawyers developed sudden attacks of vagueness. But figures had the considerable virtue of remaining where they had been placed. The ledger lay open on his desk. It was bound in cracked black leather, about 3 inches thick, with pages yellowed at the edges and a spine that had survived better than the people whose transactions it recorded. I had brought it from Blackwood Manor under a receipt signed by the Foundation. Wolfe had spent the previous hour reading it. I had spent the previous hour watching him read it. There are professions in which watching another man read a book is considered unproductive. In Wolfe's office, it can be the equivalent of watching a safecracker work. He turned another page. "Archie." "Yes?" "Coffee." I poured it. He drank. Then he returned to the ledger. "What have you found?" 7 names, that is what I found. 6 are familiar, which means the 7th matters. Naturally. I leaned over his shoulder. The page was dated October 1954. 7 names appeared in a column. Charles Blackwood, Eleanor, Richard Blackwood, Margaret Blackwood, Helen, Blackwood, Thomas Avery. And Elias Hart. I looked at the last name. Elias Hart. Yes, not Leonard Price, no. Then Leonard Price was the witness, and Elias Hart was something else. Yes. What? Wolfe closed the ledger. That is what we are going to discover. I sat down. Where do we start? With the money. I was afraid you'd say that. You should be grateful. Why? Money is more reliable than memory. That's not what my bank account says. He ignored me. Make a list. I opened my notebook. Of every company mentioned in the ledger, I began. Blackwood Timber Holdings, Blackwood Land Company, Ashbury Development, Harrow Creek Properties, North Valley Timber, then several smaller companies. Wolfe stopped me. Read the dates. I did. The first transaction, October 3, 1954. The second, October 6. The third, October 11. Then October 14. Then October 17. Then October 18. Then October 21. I looked at him. The whole thing happened around the signing. Yes. And the final transaction was the day after Eleanor left. Yes. That can't be coincidence. It isn't. The ledger contained columns for land, parcels, payment amounts, company names, and initials. The figures were surprisingly small. Too small for the acreage involved. I pointed. These prices are ridiculous. Correct. Who buys 3 acres for $12,000? Someone who is not really buying it. I looked at the entries again. The Southern Tract, 320 acres. Transferred to Harrow Creek Properties. Then Harrow Creek sold it to North Valley Timber. North Valley transferred it to Blackwood Land Company. Blackwood Land Company transferred it back to Blackwood Timber Holdings. 4 transactions, 1 piece of land. Different companies, different amounts, same ultimate control. I whistled. That's a merry little circle. It is a shell arrangement. Whys, taxes, only. No, he pointed to the figures. Look at the acreage. I did. The amount changes. Yes, the land doesn't. Exactly. The same property becomes more valuable, then less valuable, then more valuable again, which allows money to disappear or appear wherever required. Someone was moving money. Someone was moving ownership. Same thing. No. Wolfe's voice became sharper. Money can be moved without changing ownership. Ownership can be changed without moving money. Here they were using both. I looked at the 7 names. Who controlled the companies? That's the next question. He handed me a sheet. Start with corporate filings. I groaned. I was hoping you'd say lunch. Lunch comes after the companies. Your priorities are brutal. Your appetite is. By noon I had the first answer. Blackwood Timber Holdings belonged to Charles Blackwood. Officially, Blackwood Land Company belonged to a group of investors. Officially, Harrow Creek Properties belonged to a man named George Bell. Officially, North Valley Timber belonged to a corporation registered in another county. Officially, that word was beginning to annoy me. Officially, none of the companies were connected. In practice, the same addresses appeared repeatedly. The same attorney handled filings and bank processed payments, and the same initials appeared beside several transactions. E.H. I took the papers upstairs. Wolfe was in his chair reading. E.H. again. Where? Everywhere. I handed him the filings. He read. Who is Elias Hart? That's what I'm trying to find out. You have found him. I have. Yes. He tapped the page. Elias Hart. Obviously. But why would his name appear in the ledger? Because he was involved. How involved? More than the others. I sat. Charles Blackwood owned the estate. Yes. Thomas Avery handled the law. Yes. Then Hart handled the money. Not quite. Land? Not quite. What then? Wolfe looked at the ledger. Information. I frowned. Information isn't an asset. It becomes one when people are willing to pay for it. He opened the ledger again. Look at the entries. I did. Every time a parcel moves, Hart's initials appear. Yes. Every time a payment changes, Hart's initials appear. Yes. Every time a company is formed, Hart's initials appear. Yes. He was keeping track. More than that. What? He was designing the arrangement. I looked at the names. So Elias Hart knew how everything worked. Precisely. Then why isn't he in the family records? Because he wasn't family. Not a servant either. No. An accountant? Possibly. Financial advisor. Close. A broker perhaps. Then why erase him? Wolfe closed the ledger. Because a man who understands the structure of a fraud is more dangerous than the man who signs the papers. That made sense. A lawyer could be replaced. A company could be dissolved. A signature could be forged. But the man who knew why every transaction existed could reconstruct the entire deception. I looked again at Elias Hart's name. 7 names. 6 visible in the photograph. 1 absent. But now the missing 7th was not Leonard Price. There were 2 men. Leonard Price, the witness. Elias Hart, the financial architect. The erased face belonged to Hart, not Price. And somewhere between them lay the real crime. I returned to Blackwood Manor the following morning. Walter Crane was in the entrance hall. You're becoming a regular visitor. I'm considering renting a room. He did not smile. Mr. Avery's here. Good. He's in the study. Better. Crane looked uncomfortable. Mr. Goodwin. Yes? You should be careful. That advice is becoming popular. I'm serious. So am I. He lowered his voice. People have been asking questions about the house. Who? I don't know. How recently? Recently? How recently? Last week. I looked at him. Before or after the photograph was sent? He hesitated. After. That was useful. Describe them. 2 men. Names? No. Age? Middle-aged. Cars? Black sedan. Lights? Lights? No. Did they enter? They here? They asked about the old records. What records? The Blackwood financial records. I smiled. Of course. Crane looked toward the study. Mr. Avery doesn't want you here. That makes me want to stay. That's what I was afraid of. Thomas Avery stood beside the fireplace when I entered. He looked older than he had 2 days before, perhaps because he knew I had discovered Elias Hart. I put the ledger on the desk. His eyes went to it. Where did you get that? The hidden room. It should have been destroyed. That's becoming your favorite sentence. What does Wolfe know? Enough. Avery's jaw tightened. About what? Elias Hart, he said. Nothing. Who was he? I don't know. I smiled. That answer is getting worn out too. I never heard the name. 7 times. What? The ledger. I opened it. 7 names. I read them aloud. Charles Blackwood, Eleanor Blackwood, Richard Blackwood, Margaret Blackwood, Helen Blackwood, Thomas Avery, Elias Hart. Avery looked at the page. For a moment I thought he might sit. He didn't. Elias Hart was not part of the family. I know. He had no official position. I know. He had no authority over the estate. Then why is his name here? I don't know. Because he handled the financial arrangement? No. Because he created the shell companies? No. Because he knew the Southern Tract had been transferred illegally? Avery's expression changed. That was enough. I closed the ledger. Thank you. I didn't say anything. You didn't need to. He moved toward me. Goodwin. Yes, some names are dangerous, so I've been told. Elias Hart's was one of them. Why? He knew too much about the land? About the people? Which people? Avery looked at the ledger. Everyone. Charles? Yes. Eleanor? Yes. Richard? Yes. Leonard Price? Avery's face tightened. Yes. And you? He said nothing. I stepped closer. Was Hart present on October 17? No. You're certain? Yes. Then why does his name appear beside the transaction? I don't know. Was he alive? Avery looked at me. Yes. Did he know Leonard Price? I don't know. Did Leonard know him? I don't know. You're very unlucky. How? Every question I ask seems to have the same answer. He turned away. I opened the ledger again. One more. He waited. Who paid Elias Hart? He did not answer. Blackwood Timber Holdings. Nothing. Charles Blackwood. Nothing. Thomas Avery. Still nothing. I looked at him. You. His face went white. No. Then who? He said quietly. Eleanor. I stared. Eleanor paid Elias Hart? Yes. Why? She needed him for what? To understand what Charles had done. That was unexpected. I closed the ledger. Then Eleanor wasn't part of the fraud. Avery looked at me. No. She was trying to stop it, yes. By using Hart, yes. And Leonard Price? Avery hesitated. He was the witness. To what? The substitution. What substitution? He said nothing. I waited. Finally. The name. Whose name? Charles Blackwood's. I felt the room become very still. Charles didn't sign the agreement. Avery looked toward the window. No. Who did? He closed his eyes. That is what Elias Hart knew. I called Wolfe from the hallway. He answered. Yes. Charles Blackwood didn't sign the agreement. I know. I stopped. You know, the ledger told us. The ledger told you that? No. Avery's behavior did. Well, he just admitted it. He says Eleanor hired Elias Hart to investigate. Expected. He says Hart knew about a name substitution. Excellent. Who signed? Did he say? No. Then we still need that. There are two men involved. Yes. Leonard Price and Elias Hart. Yes. Price was the witness. Hart was the investigator. Exactly. Wolfe was silent. I heard the faint rustle of paper. What else? Avery says Eleanor paid Hart. Good. Why would she? To discover who had forged Charles Blackwood's name. Then Eleanor knew. She did. She knew before the photograph. Yes. Then the photograph was taken after she discovered the fraud. Likely. And the seventh person was Leonard. No. I frowned. Why not? Because the ledger has 7 names. Yes. 6 people in the photograph, plus Elias Hart. Then Hart is the 7th. Exactly. I looked back toward the study. Leonard Price wasn't in the photograph? No. But we have his photograph. Yes. Then where was he? That is what you must determine. I stared at the telephone. Wolfe continued. Archie. Yes? Do you remember the sentence written beneath the photograph? Which one? He was not the man who signed. Yes. That sentence referred to Leonard Price. Yes. And the photograph showed Elias Hart. Exactly. I felt the pieces shift. The 7 names. 6 people in the family. Elias Hart as the 7th. Leonard Price as the witness outside the photograph. The erased face belonged to Hart, not Price. That explained why the body remained. Hart had been standing among the family because he was part of the financial arrangement. Leonard Price had seen somewhere else. Perhaps downstairs. Perhaps in the library. Perhaps waiting. I asked. Why was Hart in the photograph? Wolfe answered. Because he was important. Important enough to stand beside Eleanor. Yes. And dangerous enough to erase. Yes. Then who erased him? That is the next question. I returned to the library. The ledger remained on the desk. Avery was gone. I examined the page again. 7 names. 6. Had columns of transactions. Hart had more, much more. Land transfers, bank payments, company formations, private advances. One entry was different. It was dated October 18, the day after the signing. Beside Hart's name was an amount, a large amount. The description read, Final Settlement. I looked at it. Then beneath it, in smaller handwriting, Paid upon delivery. I searched the corresponding document. There was none. I turned the page. Another entry. October 19. Receipt acknowledged. No amount. No description. Just initials, EH. I photographed both pages. Then I saw something else. The ledger's final page contained a list of documents. One was marked Original Southern Survey. Another, Original Transfer Agreement. Another, Private Memorandum. All three were marked with the same notation. Delivered to EH. I stared. Elias Hart had received the originals. Not copies. The originals. That meant Hart had possessed the evidence. And if he possessed it after the signing, he could prove the fraud, unless someone took it from him. I searched the hidden room again. The original survey was gone. The transfer agreement was gone. The memorandum was gone. Only references remained. But one box contained a receipt, received from EH, no signature. Date. October 21, 1954. I read it. Then I understood the significance. Elias Hart had not disappeared after the signing. He had remained involved for 4 days. October 17, October 18, October 19, October 21, then nothing. No further records, no death notice, no employment, no address, no correspondence. Just silence. I called Wolfe again. Elias Hart disappeared after October 21. Not disappeared. How do you know? Because you would not have called it that if you had found evidence. What should I call it? Removed. From the records, perhaps. I looked at the ledger. One more thing. What? Hart was paid upon delivery. Delivery of what? Unknown. Then find out. Where? Blackwood Manor. I looked around. I'm here. Then look. I laughed. You've been waiting all morning to say that. Yes. I searched until sunset. The hidden room produced no further papers. The library produced nothing. The study produced nothing. Then I remembered the grandfather clock. 11:17, 72 years. I walked into the entrance hall. Crane was there. Why does the clock stop at 11:17? He stared at me. I don't know. Who winds it? Nobody. Why? It's broken. Has anyone repaired it? No. Why not? It's old. I looked at the clock, then at the wall, then at the photograph in my hand. The photograph had been taken after the celebration, the violin, the agreement, the hidden room, the witness, the ledger. I walked to the clock. I opened the lower cabinet. Inside were gears, dust, a small brass key, and a folded paper. I pulled it out. Crane stepped toward me. What's that? I unfolded it. 3 words. Hart has it. Underneath. 11:17. I looked at the clock. Crane looked too. Who wrote that? I don't know. Did you know about this? No. You're lying again. I swear. I believed him this time. I looked at the clock face. 11:17. A time. A message. Not a date. A location. A signal. I thought of the violin, the unfinished melody, the balcony, the hidden chamber. All these years I had assumed the photograph was the center. It wasn't. The photograph was only one piece of a system. The ledger was another. The clock was another. The 7th name was another. And Elias Hart had been at the center of all of them. I called Wolfe. He answered. Hart had the documents. Yes, says 11:7. Yes. There's a note inside. What does it say? Hart has it. Interesting. Then Hart didn't merely know about the fraud. No, he had the evidence. Yes. Where did he take it? Wolfe was silent. Then, that is what the next question must be. Why? Because if Hart had the original documents and someone removed him from the photographs, then whoever wanted him erased needed something more than his silence. What? His papers. I looked at the note again. Hart has it. The words seemed suddenly less like a warning and more like a countdown. I said, Do you think Hart was killed? Wolfe did not answer immediately. Then he said, I think someone believed he would be. I frowned. What's the difference? A dead man cannot produce evidence. Exactly. An absent man can. That was Wolfe. Always one step ahead. I looked toward the dark windows of Blackwood Manor. The house had been quiet for decades. Too quiet. But now I knew that beneath its silence were 7 names, a fraudulent property transfer, a hidden room, a missing witness, an erased face, and a financial arrangement designed to make ownership impossible to follow. And one name appeared everywhere. Elias Hart. The man who knew where the money went. The man who knew which land had been stolen. The man who possessed the original documents. The man who stood beside Eleanor Blackwood in the photograph. The man whose face someone had deliberately removed. I folded the note. Tomorrow, I said. Wolfe's voice came through the receiver. No, I waited. Tonight. Why? Because 11:17 is not a historical detail. He paused. It is an instruction. The line went dead. I looked at the clock. 11:04. I had 13 minutes to find out what Elias Hart had hidden, and for the first time since I had arrived at Blackwood Manor, I had the unpleasant feeling that somebody else was watching the clock too. Chapter 6. The Witness Who Changed His Story. At 11:17, the clock remained silent. Was disappointing. I had expected something more dramatic. A hidden compartment opening by itself would have been satisfactory. A gunshot would have been excessive but memorable. A ghost emerging from the wall would at least have saved me the trouble of explaining to Wolfe why I had spent 13 minutes staring at a clock. Instead, nothing happened. The clock simply showed 11:17. I stood beneath it in the entrance hall of Blackwood Manor, with my flashlight in one hand and the folded note in the other. Hart has it, that was all. No mechanism, no signal, no revelation. Then I noticed the pendulum. It was not moving. That was odd because the clock had been running when I first arrived. I touched the glass. The pendulum swung once, then stopped. I opened the cabinet again. There was nothing behind it except the old brass key and dust. I was about to close the door when I noticed a narrow scratch on the inside panel. Someone had carved a line into the wood, then another, then another. 7 short marks. Beneath them, one longer mark. I stared. 7 names, one erased. I took a photograph and left. There was no point staying in a house that had decided to become mysterious after midnight. Besides, Wolfe was waiting. And Wolfe disliked waiting almost as much as he disliked unnecessary movement. At 9 the following morning, I put the photograph of the clock on his desk. He studied it. 7 marks. Yes. 1 longer. Yes. Have you identified them? Not yet. Good. I stared at him. Good? If you had, I would have had to ask whether you were certain. I enjoy being doubted. You should. He turned the photograph toward himself. Where did you find the marks? Inside the clock. Why did you look there? Because you told me to. No. I told you to look for what had been forgotten. And I found it, perhaps. I sat. Wolfe, the clock is set at 11:17. Yes. And the note says Hart has it. Yes. Could 11:17 be the time Hart left? Possibly. Or the time he was supposed to leave? Possibly. Or the time something happened? Possibly. You are enjoying that word. I use it when there are several possibilities. You could narrow them. I could. He closed the photograph. But first I want to know what happened during the missing hour. I frowned. What missing hour? The hour everyone has avoided mentioning. I understood. October 17. Yes. The photograph was taken during the celebration. Yes. The agreement was signed. Yes. Hart was present. Yes. Leonard Price was somewhere in the house. Yes. And then, Wolfe looked at me. Then everyone remembers. That's the problem. No. What's the problem? Everyone remembers the same thing incorrectly. The first person I interviewed was Margaret Blackwood. She had been sitting in the morning room when I arrived, with a cup of tea untouched beside her. She looked older than she had during my previous visit, or perhaps simply less prepared. Mrs. Blackwood, I thought you had finished asking questions. I thought so too. She gave me a tired smile. About Elias Hart? Yes. I told you I never knew him. You told me you did not remember him. I said I didn't know him. Those aren't the same. She looked toward the window. I don't understand why this matters after all these years. Because someone sent us the photograph. Perhaps someone wants attention. Perhaps. And because of that, we are all being questioned again. Only the interesting ones. She looked at me sharply. Did Elias Hart attend the celebration on October 17? No. You're certain? Yes. Was Leonard Price there? No. Was anyone there who wasn't listed in the official records? No. Then who was the 7th person in the photograph? She looked at me. There was a pause, then she said, I don't know. You're looking at the photograph when you say that. Yes. And you recognize him? No. Then why are you afraid? I'm not. Mrs. Blackwood. She turned. You've already told me that Hart never existed in the family records. That's true. And you've said the photograph was altered. I never said that. You said you didn't know the person. Yes. And now you say you're afraid. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. She sat again. For a moment I thought she might speak. Instead she said Elias Hart was there. I waited. Where? In the library, during the celebration. Yes. Why did you deny it? Because I was told to. By whom? She looked down. Thomas Avery. That was useful. Why? Because Hart had found something. What? The projects had been altered. By whom? I don't know. Did Hart know? Yes. Did he intend to expose it? Yes. To whom? To everyone. When? That night. Then why didn't he? Her fingers tightened around the teacup. Because he disappeared. When? After 11, before the photograph. No. The photograph was taken after the signing. Yes. Then Hart was photographed. Yes. And afterward, he went into the library. With whom? She hesitated. Eleanor. That stopped me. Mrs. Blackwood? Yes. How long? About an hour. I leaned forward. What happened during that hour? I know. You were in the house. Yes. You saw them enter. Yes. You never saw them come out? No. Then how do you know Hart left? She looked at me. Because I was told he did. By whom? Avery. At what time? She thought. After midnight. That's interesting. Why? Because you just said Hart disappeared after 11. She went pale. I stood. Mrs. Blackwood, which is it? She did not answer. Did Hart leave at 11? Silence. Or after midnight? Still nothing. I picked up my notebook. Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. I turned. She said quietly. He was alive when I saw him. That mattered. Very much. Thomas Avery was in his study. He looked annoyed when I entered. Again. I have nothing more to say. That's fortunate. He looked at me. Why? Because I'm not here to ask what you have to say. Then why are you here? To ask what Margaret has to say. His expression changed, only slightly, but I saw it. She told me Elias Hart was in the library. Avery said nothing. She said he intended to expose the property fraud. Still nothing. She said he entered the library with Eleanor. His face tightened. That's impossible. Why? Eleanor was not in the library. She says she was. She's mistaken. About the same hour? Yes. She says Hart disappeared after 11. Avery stared at me. Did he? Yes. At what time? 11. Exactly? Approximately. 11 is not approximately. I don't remember. You told Margaret he left after midnight. No. You told her? No. Who told her? I don't know. I smiled. That's unfortunate. What? Because she said you did. He leaned back. She is old. She's not confused. Everyone is confused about that night, except you. He looked away. I placed the photograph of Elias Hart on the desk. You know, he was there. No. You know what he found? You know what happened during the missing hour? His eyes went to the photograph. Which hour? From 11 to midnight. There was no missing hour. Exactly. I sat. You see, Mr. Avery, that's the problem. What problem? Everyone has a story about what happened before 11 and after midnight. Yes, but nobody can account for 11 to midnight. He stared at me. You are inventing a mystery. No, nothing happened. Then why can't anyone describe it? He said nothing. Mrs. Blackwood says Hart entered the library with Eleanor. No, you say Eleanor wasn't there. Correct. Blackwood says Hart disappeared after 11. He left at 11. You say that. Yes, then you both agree that he left. Yes, but you disagree about when. He looked at me. Does that matter? Very much. Why? Because if Hart left at 11, he left before the hour began. And if he left after midnight, he was inside the house during the entire hour. Avery stood. You are making too much of a simple discrepancy. No. What, then? The discrepancy is not the mystery. I looked at him. The agreement between your stories is. He frowned. You both insist Hart left. Yes. You both avoid saying where he went, because we don't know, and you both place his departure on opposite sides of the same hour. That isn't confusion. What is it? A cover. His face hardened. For what? For the missing hour. I went to see Richard Blackwood. He was in the billiard room. He did not look pleased to see me. Archie, Richard, I've answered your questions. You've answered the safe ones. I don't know what that means. Neither do I. He smiled without humor. Then were both satisfied. Was Elias Hart at the celebration? No. Was he in the photograph? Then why does everyone react when I mention him? Because you keep mentioning him. Did he discover the property arrangement was fraudulent? Richard's cue stopped halfway toward the ball. Who told you that? That's not an answer. He looked at me. Yes. Did he intend to expose it? Yes. When? That night. Did he speak with Eleanor? I don't know. Did he enter the library? I don't know. Did he leave before midnight? Yes. When? 11. Exactly. Yes. How, where? At the front door. At 11? Yes. Did he leave the property? Yes. Did you see him get into a car? No. Walk. Down the drive? No. Then how do you know he left? Richard's face tightened. He said he was leaving. To whom? To me. What did he say? I don't remember. That's convenient. I've had 72 years to forget. Then why remember 11? He looked at me. Because that was when he left. Who told you? Nobody answered. I waited. Finally, Richard said, I don't want to discuss this. That's all right. I stood. I've already discussed it with your family. He looked up. Who? Everyone. His expression changed. That was enough. At 4 that afternoon, I was back at the brownstone. Wolfe was in the dining room. He had a plate of roast chicken, asparagus, and potatoes in front of him. I sat opposite him. Elia's Hart was there. I know. Margaret admitted it. Good. She says Hart found the fraudulent arrangement and intended to expose it. Expected. She says he entered the library with Eleanor. Wolfe looked at me. Interesting. Richard says Hart left at 11. Also interesting. Thomas says Eleanor wasn't in the library. More interesting. Everyone agrees Hart left. Yes, but nobody saw him leave. Ah, and everyone gives a different reason for knowing. Wolfe put down his fork. Tell me exactly what they said. I did. He listened without interruption. When I finished, he said, they have constructed a bridge over an empty space. Meaning? Each story is designed to reach the same conclusion. That Hart left. Yes, even though nobody saw him. Correct. So Hart did not leave. That is not yet certain. I frowned. Then, what do we know? We know that everyone wants us to believe he left. Why? Because if he did not leave, someone must account for where he was. The library, yes. And the missing hour, yes. So what happened in the library? Wolfe leaned back. That is where the case turns. At 5:30, Wolfe told me to return to Blackwood Manor. Why? Take Margaret Blackwood back to the library. Why her? Because she saw Hart enter. She says she did. Then she can show you where, and if she refuses? She won't. How do you know? Because she has spent 72 years afraid that someone would ask. I drove back. Margaret was waiting in the entrance hall. She looked exhausted. I knew you would return. That saves time. I don't want to go into the library. I know. Why? Because you know what happened there. She looked at me. I don't. You know enough. She walked slowly toward the library. I followed. The room was dark. I turned on the lamp. Margaret stood near the fireplace. Where? She pointed. That door. The door to the hidden room? No, she pointed toward the far wall. That one. I looked. It was a narrow wooden door concealed between two bookcases. I had not noticed it before. I opened it. A small corridor led toward the rear of the house. Margaret whispered. Hart went through there. When? After the photograph. With Eleanor? Yes. Where did they go? I don't know. You followed them? No. Then how do you know? I heard them. Talking. Arguing. About what? She closed her eyes. The agreement. Who was angry? Eleanor. At Hart? No. At whom? Charles. That was important. Was Charles there? No. Then why was she angry? Because Hart told her the papers were already gone. I stared at her. What papers? The originals. The Southern Survey? Yes. The transfer? Yes. Who had them? Margaret shook her head. I don't know, but Hart did not. No. Then what did he have? She looked toward the hidden door. Proof. What proof? A copy. Of what? The signature. I felt the pieces shift again. The forged signature? She nodded. Hart had proved that the signature on the agreement was not Charles Blackwood's. I sat on the edge of the desk. Then why did he disappear? I don't know. Did you hear anything else? She hesitated. A door closing? Yes. At what time? 11:17. I looked toward the grandfather clock in the hall. The same time, 11:17. You remember that? What happened at 11:17? The door closed. Which door? The rear door. Then what silence? Did Hart come back? No. Did Eleanor know? Did anyone enter? She looked at me. Thomas. At what time? After midnight. What did he do? He went into the library. Alone? Yes. How long? About 20 minutes. Then he left. Did you see him? No. How do you? No, I heard him. I looked at her. Mrs. Blackwood, you have just given me the missing hour. She shook her head. No, yes, no. I have only told you what I remember. That's enough. I called Wolfe from the library. I know the hour. Tell me. At 11:17, a door closed. Which door? The rear door from the library corridor. Who was inside? Hart and Eleanor had entered the corridor. Then, silence until after midnight. Thomas Avery entered the library. Good. He stayed 20 minutes. Excellent. Then left. Did Margaret see him? Heard him? Yes. Wolfe was silent. Archie. Yes? What does that tell you? That Thomas was lying. About Hart leaving at 11? Yes. And Margaret was lying too. About what? She said she didn't know what happened. But she did. Yes. Why? Because she is protecting someone. Who? I thought about it. Eleanor. Correct. And Avery is protecting someone too. Yes. Who that, Wolfe said, is the important question. I looked at the dark corridor. What if Hart didn't leave? He didn't. What happened to him? We don't know. Then why does everyone say he did? Because a living witness is inconvenient. And a missing witness? More so. I felt a chill. Do you think Hart was killed? No, why not? Because if he had been killed, the stories would be simpler. I frowned. What? Their lies are not designed to conceal a murder. Then what? A disappearance. Why? Because they needed Hart to vanish without proving that he had been harmed. Who needed that? That is what we will discover. At 7, Wolfe gave me another instruction. Find Leonard Price. We already know he was the witness. Find him. He's dead. His records. Where everywhere. That was not helpful. But it was Wolfe. I began searching. Leonard Price had worked as a survey assistant, not a servant, not a photographer, not a lawyer, a survey assistant. He had worked for an engineering firm in Ashbury. In 1954, that firm had been contracted to survey Blackwood land, and the firm had one surviving file. I found it in a municipal archive. Inside was a report, Southern Tract Survey, October 1954, prepared by Leonard Price. I read the report. The acreage was wrong, the boundary was wrong, the transfer was invalid. At the bottom was a handwritten note, E.H. agrees, then another. Price must not sign revised copy. I stared at it. Someone had tried to force Leonard Price to sign a false survey. He had refused. Elias Hart had agreed with him. That made the two men allies, and the property fraud depended upon silencing both. I turned the page. A final note. Meeting at Blackwood, October 17, 11 p.m. So there had been a meeting, not a celebration, a meeting, at 11. During the missing hour, I called Wolfe. Leonard Price was called to Blackwood at 11. Good. He and Hart were working together. Yes. They were supposed to meet someone. Who? Unknown. Find out. I'll try. No. What? Don't try. I waited. No. He hung up. At 9 that night, I returned to the brownstone. Wolfe was in the office. The ledger lay open, the photograph beside it, the original survey beneath both. He had arranged them in a line. I looked. You're making a timeline. Yes. October 17. Yes. Photograph. Yes. Signing. Yes. 11. Meet 11:17. The clock midnight. Thomas. Enters. Yes. Then, that is what. Missing. I looked at the ledger. What about Hart? Wolfe tapped his name. Alias Hart did not disappear that night. How do you know? Because he appears in the ledger after October 17. October 18, yes. October 19, yes. October 21, yes. Then he was alive. Almost certainly. And someone was paying him. Yes. Then the missing hour wasn't about killing him. No. What was it about? Wolfe looked at me. Changing his story. I stared. What? Someone convinced Hart to change what he knew how. I don't know. Threat? Possibly. Possibly. Blackmail? Possibly. You're doing it again. I am waiting for evidence. He pointed to the photograph. 6 witnesses, then the ledger, 7 names, then the survey, 2 men who knew the truth, then the clock, 1 missing hour. He leaned back. The important fact is not that their stories differ. No, it is that they differ in precisely the way necessary to conceal the same event. I understood. Margaret placed Hart in the library with Eleanor. Richard placed Hart at the front door at 11. Avery placed Eleanor elsewhere and Hart outside. 3 stories, 3 locations, 3 explanations, but all of them had the same purpose. To make sure nobody could establish where Hart had been between 11 and midnight. I said, they're not protecting Hart. No, they're protecting whoever was with him. Yes, Eleanor. Wolfe nodded. And if Eleanor was with Hart during that hour, she may have received the proof. What proof? The proof that the signature was forged and the original documents already. Taken by whom? That is the question. I looked. Photograph. The erased Elias Hart stood beside Eleanor. The body remained. The face was gone. Someone had tried to remove him from history, but now the pattern was clear. Hart had discovered the fraud. Leonard Price had documented it. Eleanor had known. Thomas Avery had helped conceal it. The original documents had vanished, and the missing hour had been deliberately erased from every witness account. I asked. Why would they all lie if Hart survived? Wolfe's expression became very still. Because the person who ordered the lie was more dangerous than Hart. Who, tomorrow? I groaned. Why tomorrow? Because tonight I want you to sleep. I can't. That is unfortunate. He returned to the ledger. I turned toward the door. Then Wolfe said, Archie, yes? If anyone asks you where Elias Hart went after 11:17, say that you don't know. Why? Because neither do I. I looked back. Wolfe nodded. Yet. And that was how the 6th day ended. Not with a body, not with an arrest, not even with a name, but with a missing hour that 6 people had spent 72 years carefully avoiding, and with the growing certainty that the man whose face had been erased from the photograph had not disappeared by accident. He had disappeared because someone needed the world to believe he had. Chapter 7. The photographs sent to Wolfe. By 9 o'clock the next morning, Nero Wolfe had already rejected 3 theories, 2 breakfasts, and 1 telephone call from Inspector Kramer. The breakfast was mine. The theories were Wolfe's, the telephone call was Kramer's. Only one of the 3 had deserved rejection. Kramer had wanted to know why a 25-year-old property dispute had suddenly become interesting. Wolfe had told him it was not interesting. Kramer had replied that whenever Wolfe said something wasn't interesting, it usually meant that somebody was about to be arrested. Wolfe had hung up. I approved. The photograph was on his desk. Beside it lay the ledger, the Southern Survey, the receipt from the clock, and a magnifying glass Wolfe had touched. That last detail bothered me. When Wolfe ignored a magnifying glass, he usually had a reason. When he ignored several pieces of evidence, he usually had a conclusion. I poured his coffee. What have you got? The photograph. I can see that, the original. I can also see that. No. He looked at me. The original photograph. I stopped. You found it? I found its history. That's less exciting. To you. Where? In the archive. I picked up the photograph. The 7 figures stood on the steps of Blackwood Manor. The face of Elias Hart had been removed so neatly that the damage was almost invisible. Almost. I turned it over. What did you find? The photograph was printed in 1954. From the original negative? Yes. Then the alteration was done after the printing. Correct. When? That is what matters. He handed me a report. The paper came from a photographic conservator. I read it. The photograph had been trimmed and chemically treated. Not recently. The alteration was at least 15 years old. Possibly older. I looked up. So the face was removed long after Hart disappeared. Yes. Why wait? Because the photograph wasn't the problem until someone needed to erase the relationship. I frowned. The relationship? Look at the 6 remaining people. I did. Charles Blackwood, Eleanor, Richard, Margaret, Helen, Thomas Avery, 6 people. Then Hart. Everyone knows they were connected. Do they? I looked again. The photograph showed them, standing together. Without Hart, the picture could be interpreted as a family gathering with Avery and Helen included. With Hart, it showed something else. A group. A business group. A group surrounding the man who handled the property arrangements. Wolfe said. The alteration was not intended to hide Hart. Then what? To hide the fact that the others knew him. I looked at him. That's a distinction. It is the distinction. I went back to Blackwood Manor that afternoon. The house seemed different, not because anything had changed, because I had. A house can conceal a secret for 72 years if everyone inside agrees to behave as though there is nothing worth concealing. Now the silence had begun to look organized. I found Margaret in the drawing room. She was reading a newspaper. She looked up. You're back. Yes. You said yesterday you had enough. I lied. She gave a faint smile. You've become very much like Mr. Wolfe. That's unfortunate. I sat. Who altered the photograph? I don't know. Who had access to the original? I don't know. Who kept the negatives? I don't know. Who knew Elias Hart had been photographed? She looked at me. Everyone. Then why remove his face? Because he was dangerous. He was already gone. That didn't matter. Why? She folded the newspaper. Because his name could still cause trouble. His name, his connection, To the Blackwoods, yes. To the property transactions, yes. To the forged agreement. She did not answer. I leaned forward. Mrs. Blackwood, the photograph was altered years later. She looked at me. How do you know? Because the chemical treatment is newer than the photograph. Her expression changed. Then someone altered it after the house changed hands. Yes. Why? That's what I'm asking. She stared at the floor. Then to make us forget. Who? I don't know. Did you? She hesitated. Yes, that was unexpected. You knew the photograph had been altered. Not when. Who did it? I don't know. Why did you say yes? Because I knew it was wrong. How? Because I saw the original. When? Years ago. Where? Here. Who showed it to you? She looked toward the hall. Charles. Charles Blackwood? Yes. When? Before he died. What did he say? She swallowed. He said, if anyone ever asks about the seventh man, say you don't remember. I wrote it down. Why? He didn't explain. Did he say Elias Hart's name? No. Did he say anything about the photograph? He said it had to be changed. By whom? He didn't tell me. Did you ask? Yes. What did he say? She looked at me. He said the photograph was not evidence of what happened. What was it evidence of? Who knew? That stopped me. Who knew what? That the property arrangement was false. I closed the notebook. Who else heard him say that? Did Thomas know? I don't know. Did Eleanor? She looked at me. Yes. When? She was there. I stared. At the time Charles said it? Yes. Then she knew the photograph had been altered. Yes. Why didn't she tell us? Because she was afraid. Of whom? Margaret whispered. Not of Hart. I waited. Of the people who survived him. I found Thomas Avery in the West Wing. He was standing beside a window. Mr. Avery, he turned. Good afternoon. Who altered the photograph? I don't know. Did Charles? No. Eleanor, I don't know. You always know less than everyone else. I've spent my life practicing. Did you see? The original, yes. Who was in it? He did not answer. Elias Hart? Silence. Yes. Then why remove him? He was no longer relevant. He was very relevant. To whom? To the property records. Those records are ancient. The land isn't. He looked at me. You're wasting your time. No. Why? Because Wolfe has reconstructed the missing hour. Avery's expression changed. I continued. Hart didn't leave at 11. No. He didn't leave before midnight. No. He was in the library. Avery looked away. With Eleanor, he closed his eyes. Yes. Who came in at midnight? Nobody. That's not what Margaret said. Margaret is mistaken. She heard you. I never went into the library. Then why does the hidden record say you did? What hidden record? The one we haven't shown you. He looked at me. I smiled. That usually worked. Not because it fooled anyone. Because it told them we knew more than we had said. What happened at 11:17? I asked. He said nothing. Who took the original documents? Nothing. Who told Hart to leave? Nothing. Who altered the photograph? Still nothing. I turned toward the door. Then he spoke. It wasn't altered to erase him. I stopped. Go on. It was altered to erase the connection. Whose idea? I don't know. You're lying. Yes. I looked back. Whose? He swallowed. Charles. That was new. Charles ordered it? Not exactly. What does that mean? He wanted Hart forgotten. Why? Because Hart had proof? What proof? The original agreement. Where was it? Avery stared at me. With Hart after the missing hour? Yes. Then Hart left with it. No, I waited. He didn't leave with it. Where did it go? Avery's voice dropped. Eleanor took it. I returned to the brownstone at once. Wolfe was in the office. Eleanor took the original agreement. He looked up. From Hart? Yes. Good. Good? That gives us a motive to alter the photograph. Not yet. I told him everything. He listened. When I finished, he asked, did Avery say who ordered the alteration? Charles? That is interesting. Why? Because Charles was dead before the alteration. So someone acted on his instruction, perhaps, or someone used his name. Wolfe nodded. Exactly. He picked up the photograph. Archie. Yes? What is missing? Hart's face. No, he pointed. The space around Hart. I looked. The image had been cut carefully, not merely the face. A small portion of the shoulder beside him had also been removed. I leaned closer. That's odd. Yes. Why cut the shoulder? Because the original negative was damaged. Or because someone needed to remove something beside him. I examined the image. A hand. There had been a hand on Hart's shoulder. The surviving photograph showed only a faint edge. Wolfe said, who stood behind Hart? I stared. The answer was almost visible. Eleanor? No. Charles? No. Thomas? No. Then who? Wolfe handed me a magnified print, a cuff, a sleeve, a ring. I knew the ring. Leonard Price. Wolfe nodded. Yes, I sat down. So Price was in the photograph after all. No. What? Look at the angle. I did. The hand was reaching from outside the frame. Price was not standing beside Hart. He was standing behind the photographer, holding Hart's shoulder. Then he was there. Yes. Why isn't he visible? Because he was behind the camera. That makes him the photographer. Correct. I stared at the photograph. Leonard Price took the picture. Yes. And the photograph was altered. Yes. And the negative still exists. Probably. I looked at Wolfe. Where? That is why the photo was sent. I understood. Someone had not sent us the photograph because it was interesting. They had sent it because it was a clue to something else. The negative. The original. The unaltered image. The version showing everyone together. Wolfe had the answer before I did. He stood and walked to the wall map. Where was the negative stored? With Price? Perhaps. His employer? Perhaps. Possibly. Then we search. No. Why not? Because someone else is already searching. I stared. The sender? Yes. How do you know? Because the photograph was mailed from Blackwood. I frowned. Blackwood? Envelope was from the estate, anonymous. Then the sender is there. Or was. He pointed to the photograph. The sender knew that the original negative existed. How? Because the photograph was altered from it, meaning they had seen the original. Yes. And knew the ledger existed. Yes. And knew Wolfe could connect them. Yes. So the sender wanted us to investigate. Correct. Why not simply tell us? Because telling us would reveal the sender. I nodded. Then the sender is afraid. Yes. Of the 6. Perhaps. Which means the sender may be one of them. Possibly. Frown. Or someone connected to them. Exactly. At 6 that evening, Inspector Kramer arrived. He brought his usual expression. It was the expression of a man who had been dragged into someone else's puzzle and was determined to make the puzzle regret it. Where's Goodwin? In the office. Where's Wolfe? In the office. Where else would he be? Dining room, Kramer grunted. I led him in. Wolfe was eating roast beef. Kramer looked at the plate. You eat while people are getting robbed. Wolfe continued chewing. Kramer looked at me. Does he ever answer? Only when the question deserves it. Kramer sat. What have you got? Wolfe swallowed. An old photograph. Kramer stared. You're wasting my time. No, there's no murder. No body, correct. No complaint. Correct. Then what am I doing here? Waiting. For what? For the truth. Kramer sighed. That's becoming expensive. Wolfe pushed the photograph toward him. Look. Kramer did. 7 people, yes. 1 face missing, yes. And the missing face belonged to Elias Hart. I know. How, Goodwin? Kramer looked at me. I shrugged. Wolfe said, the important fact is not that Hart's face was removed. Kramer looked at him. It is that someone wanted the remaining 6 people to appear unrelated to him. Kramer frowned. Why? Because they were related. Business, property, fraud. Yes, Kramer leaned back. Who sent the picture? That is what we are determining. Why send it to you? Because the sender knew I would recognize the pattern. Which pattern? The photograph, the ledger, the missing hour. Kramer looked at me. You have a ledger. I nodded. Here, he examined it. Old. Very. Still useful? Extremely. Wolfe said, the ledger proves the companies were controlled through a common financial arrangement. Kramer looked at the names. 6 people. 7, he pointed. Elias Hart. Yes. Dead? We don't know. Kramer looked up. Then find him. Wolfe said, he is not the person we need to find. Kramer frowned. Why? Because the person who sent us the photograph is still alive. Silence. Kramer looked at me, then at Wolfe. You're saying the sender knows where the negative is? Yes. And the ledger? Yes. And the truth about the property? Yes. Then why not come forward? Because the sender is not asking us to find Hart. Kramer waited. Wolfe's eyes went to the photograph. The sender is asking us to expose the people who erased him. The original negative was found 2 hours later. Not at Blackwood Manor. Not in Leonard Price's files. Not in the municipal archive. It was in a small photography shop in Albany that had closed 30 years earlier. The shop's owner had kept old negatives in labeled envelopes. One envelope was marked, Blackwood, October 1954. I held it up. My hands were suddenly very careful. Inside was a glass plate negative. The image was reversed. 7 people, all faces intact. Elias Hart was smiling. I looked at the figure beside him. Eleanor Blackwood. Her hand rested lightly on Hart's arm. Behind them stood Charles, and at the edge of the frame was Thomas Avery. Leonard Price had taken the picture. The photograph was not a family celebration. It was a business gathering. The 7 men and women were arranged deliberately, and Hart stood at the center. But there was something else. In the background, through the open library window, was a table. On it lay papers. One document was visible, the property agreement, and beside it stood Leonard Price, holding a second paper, the survey. I stared. The original photograph shows the documents. Yes, Wolfe said, and the altered version hides them. Exactly. Kramer leaned over. That makes the photograph evidence. Yes. Then whoever altered it wanted the evidence gone. No. Wolfe's voice was quiet. They wanted the connection gone. I looked again. The photograph showed everyone together. The altered version made Hart disappear, but it also removed the papers from view. Someone had not merely erased a man. They had erased the moment that connected 6 people to the fraud. I said the sender knew, yes. Then why send only the altered photograph? Wolfe smiled. Because the alteration itself is the message. At 11, Wolfe called everyone. Margaret, Richard, Helen, Thomas Avery, Eleanor, Inspector Kramer, and the man whose name had been absent from Blackwood records for 72 years, Leonard Price's son, David Price. He arrived, carrying a small leather case. I knew immediately. What is that? He looked at Wolfe. Everything. Wolfe nodded. Put it on the desk. David opened it. Inside was an envelope, old, yellow, sealed. On it was written, "For the man who asks why Elias Hart disappeared." I looked at Wolfe. He said nothing. David continued. My father left this with me. When? Before he died. Why didn't you open it? Because he told me not to. Until when? Until the photograph was sent. The room became quiet. Wolfe pointed to the envelope. Open it. David did. Inside was a letter and a second photograph, the original, unaltered, but the letter was what mattered. It contained one sentence. The man who erased Hart's face is not the man who erased Hart's name. Kramer looked at Wolfe. What does that mean? Wolfe leaned back. It means we have been asking the wrong question. Which was, who erased Elias Hart? And the right one. Wolfe looked at the 6 witnesses. Who needed everyone to believe that Elias Hart never belonged among them? Nobody moved. Then Wolfe said, the answer is in the photograph. I looked at the original again. 7 people. 1 agreement, 1 survey, 1 fraudulent transfer, 1 missing hour, and 1 face that someone had tried to remove. The photograph had finally spoken, not about a dead man, about 6 living ones. Wolfe folded the letter. The sender knew the negative existed. He looked at Kramer and knew the ledger survived. Then he looked at the 6 witnesses and knew that only an investigation could force the old story apart. He turned to me. Archie, yes. The photograph was never a request for identification. What was it? An accusation? I looked at the faces. For 72 years they had survived because everyone remembered the same lie. Now the photograph had brought them together again, not to remember Elias Hart, to answer for him. And Wolfe, who had begun with an erased face, had finally found what the sender had wanted him to see. The missing man was not the mystery. The people who had needed him missing were. Chapter 8. Wolfe remembers the 7th man. At 9 o'clock that morning, every chair in Nero Wolfe's office was occupied. This was an event of some rarity. Wolfe disliked crowds. He disliked strangers. He disliked being interrupted while eating. And he disliked people who believed that because they had been invited into his office, they had acquired the right to speak. I had therefore been given strict instructions to keep everyone seated until Wolfe was ready. Inspector Kramer sat nearest the door, looking as though he had been invited to a funeral and suspected he might be required to give the eulogy. Margaret Blackwood sat beside him. Richard Blackwood sat beside Margaret. Helen Blackwood was opposite them. Thomas Avery sat alone. Eleanor Blackwood had refused the chair I offered her and remained standing beside the window. 2 representatives of the present ownership of Blackwood Manor sat together at the far end of the room. They had inherited the estate after the last of the Blackwoods died, and until yesterday they had believed the property's history was an unfortunate collection of old legal complications. They were about to learn that history had been more profitable than unfortunate. David Price sat beside me. On Wolfe's desk lay the objects that had brought us there. The altered photograph, the original negative, the ledger, the Southern survey, the fragment of the property agreement, the receipt from the clock, and the letter left by Leonard Price. Wolfe entered from the dining room. He was wearing a dark coat, his expression severe, and his hands were clasped behind his back. He looked at the assembled people, then at me. "Archie, yes? Close the door." I did. Wolfe walked to his chair. He lowered himself into it with the careful dignity of a monarch accepting an audience. Kramer grunted. "Well?" Wolfe ignored him. He examined the photograph. Then he looked at the people in the room. 72 years ago, he said, 7 people stood on the steps of Blackwood Manor. Nobody moved. One of those 7 was Elias Hart. Eleanor closed her eyes. Wolfe continued. 6 people have spent 72 years pretending he was never there. Kramer looked at the 6 witnesses. That's a serious accusation. It is a conclusion. Based on what? Everything. Kramer folded his arms. Then start somewhere. Wolfe looked at him. I have. He picked up the altered photograph. This is the photograph that was sent to me. He held it so everyone could see. Hart's face has been removed, Richard. Blackwood said. We've already established that. No. Wolfe's voice was quiet. You have established that the face was removed. He looked at Richard. You have not established why. Richard said nothing. Wolfe placed the photograph on the desk. The photograph was taken in October 1954 during what was described afterward as a private celebration following the signing of a property agreement. He paused. It was not a celebration. Thomas Avery shifted in his chair. Wolfe noticed. Mr. Avery knows that, Avery said. I was a lawyer. You were more than that. I represented the estate. You helped construct the arrangement. Avery's face hardened. That is an interpretation. No. Wolfe turned to the ledger. It is arithmetic. He opened it. 7 names. He read them slowly. Charles Blackwood, Eleanor Blackwood, Richard Blackwood, Margaret Blackwood, Helen Blackwood, Thomas Avery, then Elias Hart. The room seemed to contract around the last name. Wolfe continued. The ledger records a series of property transfers through several companies. The companies appear independent. They were not. He pointed to the pages. Different addresses, different directors, but the same financial control. Kramer leaned forward. Blackwood controlled them through intermediaries. Why? To disguise the transfer of the southern land. Who benefited? Wolfe looked at Avery. Those who arranged it. Avery said nothing. Wolfe turned another page. Elias Hart understood the arrangement. He pointed to the initials. EH. Appears whenever the ownership changes, whenever a payment is made, and whenever a new company enters the chain. He closed the ledger. Hart was not an employee recording the transactions after they happened. He looked around the room. He understood why they happened. Margaret spoke. Hart wanted to expose it. Wolfe turned toward her. Yes, you know that. I know you told Archie. She lowered her eyes. I was afraid. Of whom? She did not answer. Wolfe looked at Eleanor. You know. Eleanor remained standing. I knew that Elias had discovered something. You knew exactly what he had discovered. Not at first. Eventually. Yes, and you hired him. Yes. Kramer frowned. You hired him to investigate the estate? Yes. Why? Eleanor's voice was barely above a whisper. Because I believed my husband was being deceived. Wolfe corrected her. Your husband was not being deceived. She looked at him. He was being protected. From what? From the truth. Wolfe nodded. Exactly. I watched Kramer. He had stopped looking annoyed. That was significant. Kramer became dangerous when he became interested. Wolfe continued. Elias Hart discovered that the property agreement carried a false signature. Thomas Avery spoke sharply. That has never been proved. Wolfe looked at him. It has. He picked up Leonard Price's survey. The original survey was prepared by Leonard Price. He held it up. The boundaries in the legitimate survey do not match the boundaries in the later agreement. He placed it beside the ledger. The fraudulent agreement transferred land under descriptions that did not correspond to the original survey. Kramer said. So the property description was changed, yes. And the signature? Also false. Wolfe lifted the photograph. The photograph records the moment when Hart knew it. He placed the original negative beside it. And this records who knew he knew. He handed the negative to Kramer. Kramer examined it, then looked at the photograph. The original shows that he... Yes, yes, and Price, yes. Kramer looked at me. Price took the photograph. Correct. Wolfe nodded. Leonard Price was not merely the photographer. He was the surveyor whose work exposed the false boundary. Kramer looked at David Price. Your father knew? David nodded. He did. When? That night. Wolfe looked at him. Your father left a letter. David handed it to Kramer. Kramer read it. His expression changed. He looked up. This says Hart kept copies. Yes, where? Wolfe smiled faintly. That is the point. Kramer stared at him. You don't know? I know enough. Then tell me. Hart arranged for evidence to survive even if the originals disappeared. Kramer looked at the photograph. Through this? Yes. Wolfe rose. He walked to the map of Blackwood Manor. The hidden room contained the ledger. He pointed. The clock contained the message. He pointed again. The library contained the meeting. Then he touched the photograph, and the photograph contained the people. He turned. Not the names, the relationships. No one spoke. Wolfe continued. That is why the photograph was altered. Richard Blackwood said, You've said that already. No. Wolfe's eyes hardened. I have said the face was removed. Now I will explain why. He pointed to the original. In the original photograph, Elias Hart stands among the Blackwoods and Thomas Avery. Then to the altered version. In the altered photograph, Hart is gone. He looked at Richard. The remaining 6, therefore, appear to have no connection with him. Richard's face changed, but the photograph still exists.
Exactly.
Then why send it? Because the alteration itself proves intent. Wolfe's voice became almost conversational. Someone wanted the photograph to survive, but wanted Hart removed from it. He paused. That means someone wanted the evidence preserved while destroying its meaning. Kramer nodded slowly. Whoever altered it knew what it showed. Yes. Who had access? Several. Wolfe looked at the 6 witnesses. One had more reason than the others. The room went silent. Wolfe turned to Thomas Avery. You altered it. Avery stood. No. You arranged for it to be altered. No. You knew the original existed. I knew. You knew Hart had been photographed. I knew. You knew the negative survived. I didn't. You knew. Because you were the person who ordered the negative removed. Avery stared at him. I never touched it. I didn't say you did. You said I ordered it. Yeah, prove it. Wolfe nodded. Gladly. He picked up the envelope containing the photographic report. The alteration was not performed in 1954. Avery said nothing. It was performed years later. How many? Approximately 15 years after the photograph was taken. That puts it in the late 60s. Yes. Wolfe looked at Avery. Who was still alive then? Avery said nothing. Charles was dead. Yes. Elias was missing. Yes. Eleanor remained. Yes. Richard remained. Margaret. Yes. Helen. Yes. And you? Avery stared at him. Wolfe continued. Charles could not have ordered the alteration. No, you used his name because he had once expressed the desire that Hart be forgotten. Avery's jaw tightened. That is speculation. No. Wolfe picked up the letter. Leonard Price left evidence. He placed it down. Eleanor kept the original agreement. He placed it beside the letter. Hart kept the proof. Then he pointed to Avery. You knew where all 3 were. Avery's face had gone pale. And you knew that if those 3 pieces were connected, the property fraud would be exposed. Kramer stood. Where is the proof that Avery ordered the alteration? Wolfe looked at him. In the ledger. Kramer frowned. The ledger? No. Wolfe smiled slightly. In the final entry. He turned the ledger around. The final page contained the 7 names. But beneath them was a line I had not noticed. A payment. The amount was small. The recipient was a photography studio. Date, description, reproduction and alteration. Kramer looked at Avery. Avery said, I never saw that. Wolfe said, you did. No, you paid for it. No, using a Blackwood company. Avery shook his head. The company had hundreds of transactions. Yes, but the authorization carries your initials. Avery said nothing. Kramer leaned over the page. EA. Wolfe nodded. Thomas Avery. Avery looked at him. Those could be anyone's initials, not when they appear beside your private account. The room was silent. Wolfe had not raised his voice. He did not need to. The numbers had spoken. I looked at the ledger. There was one thing still bothering me. What about Hart? Wolfe looked at me. Yes. What happened to him? Everyone waited. Wolfe sat. Elias Hart was not killed at Blackwood Manor. Avery looked at him. No, Wolfe continued. At 11:17, the rear library door closed. Margaret lowered her head. Hart was alive. Eleanor was with him. Eleanor nodded. They had the evidence. Wolfe looked at her. You took the original agreement. She did not deny it. Because Hart told me I could not trust the others. Why? Because he believed someone would destroy it. Who? She looked at Avery. Thomas, Avery said. That is absurd. Wolfe ignored him. At midnight, Hart left through the rear entrance. Kramer said. Alone? No. With Eleanor? No. Then who? Wolfe looked at David Price. Leonard Price. David stared. My father? Yes. Why? To preserve the evidence. David looked stunned. Wolfe explained. Hart knew that the estate would be searched. He knew the original agreement would be taken. He therefore divided the evidence. The agreement went with Eleanor. And Hart kept the copies, yes. What happened afterward? Hart disappeared. Where? He left New York. Kramer frowned. How do you know? Because he continued sending information. To whom? Eleanor. She closed her eyes. Letters. Yes. Where are they? Destroyed. Wolfe looked at her. Not all. Eleanor opened her eyes. He placed a small envelope on the desk. She stared at it. I found that among the papers sent to me. She did not touch it. Why did you never tell anyone? Because Hart told me not to. What did he say? She swallowed. He said that if the records were ever restored, someone would have to prove not merely that the agreement was false, but that the people involved had deliberately erased him. Wolfe nodded. That is why the photograph survived. Kramer looked at Wolfe. Then Hart planned all this, not all of it. What did he plan? The survival of evidence. The photograph. Yes. The negative. Yes. Yes. The ledger. Yes. Yes. Why? Wolfe's expression softened slightly. Because he understood something simple. What? A fact can be destroyed. He looked at the photograph. A record can be destroyed. He looked at the ledger. A witness can disappear. He looked at Eleanor. But a pattern is harder to destroy. No one spoke. Wolfe continued. Hart therefore created several records that could independently seem meaningless. The photograph, the ledger, the survey, the clock, the letters. Yes, together they reconstruct the truth. Exactly. Kramer walked toward Thomas Avery. Avery did not move. You altered the photograph. Avery said nothing. You helped conceal the property fraud. Nothing. You knew Hart possessed the evidence. Nothing. You attempted to make the 6 witnesses appear unrelated to him. Avery finally spoke. I did not erase him. Wolfe looked up. No. Avery's voice cracked. I did not erase his name, no. I only removed his face. Wolfe nodded. Exactly. Kramer stared at him. Avery sank into his chair. I was trying to protect the estate. From the truth? Kramer asked. Avery did not answer. Wolfe did. No. He looked at the photograph. From the consequences. There was one final question. I knew it before Kramer asked. What happened to the original negative? Wolfe pointed to David Price. His father preserved it. David nodded. Why? Because Hart told him to. Where was it all these years? With the photography shop. Why? My father paid the owner to keep it. Did he know why? Yes. Did he know about the ledger? David shook his head. No. Then how did the photograph reach Wolfe? David looked at me. Because my father left instructions. What instructions? David opened the leather case. Another paper. I took it. At the top was written, when the altered photograph is sent, release the negative. I looked at Wolfe. He nodded. So the sender was you? David shook his head. No. Then who? David looked at Eleanor. She said nothing. I understood. She had sent the photograph. Kramer looked at her. Mrs. Blackwood? Eleanor nodded. I sent it. The room went still. Why? She looked at the photograph. Because I was the last person alive who remembered why Elias Hart mattered. Wolfe said, and because you knew the records would eventually be destroyed. Yes. You waited until now. I had no choice. Why? Because Thomas was still alive. Avery looked at her. She continued. I was afraid that if I spoke before the estate changed hands, everything would disappear, Kramer said. So you sent the photograph to Wolfe? Yes. Why him? She looked at Wolfe. Because Elias told me that if the truth ever needed to be found, I should find the man who could see what wasn't there. Wolfe's eyebrows rose slightly. I smiled. That sounded like something Elias Hart would have said. Kramer gathered documents. He looked at Wolfe. You realize this is going to make my morning unpleasant. Your mornings are frequently unpleasant. Thanks. He turned to Avery. You're coming with me. Avery stood slowly. Before he left, he looked at Wolfe. Why did you care? Wolfe looked at him. I didn't. Avery frowned. I cared about the structure. The structure? 6 people did not accidentally forget one man. Wolfe picked up the photograph. That required design. Avery said nothing. He left with Kramer. The others followed slowly. Margaret stopped at the door. She looked at the photograph. I should have told the truth, Wolfe said. Yes. She nodded, then left. Eleanor remained. For a moment she stood alone. Mr. Wolfe. Yes? Did Elias know you would understand? Wolfe looked at the photograph. No. She waited. He only knew that someone eventually would. She nodded. Then she left. When the door finally closed, the brownstones became quiet. I collected the cups. Wolfe remained at his desk. The photograph lay before him. 7 people. 1 face erased. 1 truth restored. I picked up the original negative. Funny, what? After all that, Hart isn't even the most interesting person in the picture. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. No. Who is? I pointed at Eleanor. She sent it. Yes. And Price preserved it. Yes. And Hart planned for the evidence to survive. Yes. And Avery tried to erase the connection. Yes. So the photograph was really about all of them. Wolfe nodded. Exactly. I put the negative down. Then why remove Hart's face? Wolfe looked at me. Because a face identifies a person. He picked up the altered photograph. A missing face identifies an intention. I considered that. And the 7 names, they prove the connection. The ledger, the mechanism, the missing hour, the concealment, the photograph, the message, and Hart, the reason for all of it. Smiled. So what was the photograph meant to show? Wolfe looked at the 7 figures. His answer was quiet. The photograph was never meant to show who was present. He paused. It was meant to prove who had been deliberately forgotten. I looked at the picture again. For 72 years, Blackwood Manor had preserved 7 names while pretending there had been only 6. The trick had almost worked. But someone had made one mistake. They had removed the face without removing the space where the man had stood. And that empty space had been enough for Wolfe. I put the photograph back on the desk. Do you think Elias Hart ever knew the picture would survive? Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. Archie, yes? A man who hides evidence in 7 different forms does not trust disappearance. No, he trusts memory. I waited. And memory, Wolfe said, is most useful when someone has gone to great trouble to destroy it. He reached for the bell. I poured his coffee before he rang it. That was one of the advantages of working for Nero Wolfe. After a while, you learned to anticipate the obvious. I looked once more at the photograph. The 7th man was still missing, but he was no longer forgotten. And in Wolfe's office, that was enough.